Just go mute for a while.
No, I'm good to go.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, let people
A
come.
lot of people in. It's 10:22.
Let's see. What should we do? Should we put the support banner
This
up?
Burundi is delicious.
Isn't it nice?
It's
not-
so
you know, I've
easy
been
to drink.
I've been surprised how unpopular some of the coffees have been recently. I'm like, why? I don't understand. I mean, I think they've been very interesting, but
I love it, but I also don't like it because it's so easy to drink. Like it goes down so easy in the morning.
yeah, I roasted it pretty light, but not too light.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it doesn't have any kind of like sharp harshness to it.
It doesn't. Whereas the Brazilian you sent me, which was the one I had previous to this, that had a real good kick to it.
Oh yeah. No, it
Like,
was.
I got done with a double shot and, well, technically quadruple shot, but
well, who's
I was
counting?
good for the day.
Yeah, that. What
More
was
Paul.
the deal with that? That was a. That was a dry process. You know, where they let it ferment.
Yeah.
Those are so unpredictable, and they get really like wild and crazy.
It is. Yeah, when you're on the edge of caffeine poisoning by the end of your first cup of coffee, that's good. That's
Somebody asked me how much coffee I drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, honestly, I don't keep track. But then I started to look. I was like, oh, maybe I should be conscious of this. It's like, I don't drink after like 5 o'clock unless I know I'm going to have a late night. And I don't mind having a late night. I should put it that way. I think it's like 4 or 5 cups, and they're like 300 milliliters each, which is like more coffee than people usually drink. It's a regular coffee mug full of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
It's all good.
I guess. I don't know. What's today?
July 8th.
Oh, I thought I might have had a test result here. Renal follow-up, July 8th. That's today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyway. All right, Paul's here. Oh, D-Fresh is here. That's 2. I guess that's worthy of a beginning.
Worthy of it. You want to hit the record?
Yeah, I'll do that
We'll
here.
dive right in.
Okay. Recording. Brilliant. Are you recording?
I am.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we like to have this nice and loud.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 257. And we, as always, are your host, Christopher Gillespie.
Who is always chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing.
And I am Donovan Riley. Am I chill and relaxed?
I don't know.
Only when I'm fighting, usually. That's
So,
really the only time I'm really in that flow state.
Update from Miss Dorothy, my daughter,
Yeah.
After we recorded last week, she was still kind of like this big balloon
Yeah.
from all the water gain.
Sure.
She lost that in like 3 days. And
Good.
so now she's super skinny because she probably lost a little bit of tone,
Sure.
being in bed for 2
Mhm.
3 weeks.
Right.
But yeah, so now she's walking again, and she's, getting into stuff and, being a normal person.
Good.
Yeah,
Praise Christ.
blood work looks good too. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was one of those freaky things. I wonder though, because this was E. coli.
Mhm.
I'm hearing about like these outbreaks,
Mhm.
from other people that I know.
Yep,
right?
me
It's
too.
like the whole
Yeah.
town gets sick.
Yeah.
It's like food poisoning, except it lasts longer, like 4 or 5 days.
Right.
So I just wonder, like, what's going on here? Anyway,
Well, we know how E. coli spreads.
generally it's food, right?
Well, it can also be waste in.
Oh,
the
that's
water,
why I
for
wonder if it got
example.
into the water supply. That's what I
Mhm.
wondered.
That's what I thought of when we were talking about it. I was like, but what about
I mean,
the water?
we do reverse osmosis. It's supposed to catch
Mhm.
that, but this bug was pretty hostile.
Mhm.
Yeah. So watch out. There's killer bugs, guys.
Well,
People.
again, with mutations, we just don't know anymore. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, I was
don't
reading about gay
remember-
bathhouses. Speaking of mutations and
Yeah.
diseases, it's like
Let's
these
start-
people are
let's start the
complaining about.
podcast off with a happy, family-friendly topic.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to people in the suffer because the headaches and the lesions and everything. I'm like,
Mm.
it kind of goes with the territory, putting things in places you shouldn't probably
They
put
don't
them.
belong. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, are you surprised that there's diseases involved?
Right.
I don't know why you wouldn't be.
You might want to study up on hepatitis and learn how that goes.
I mean, how many colon cleanses can you do?
Well, it's true, but living in a third world country where hepatitis is in the air 24/7 because you have open sewers and so forth.
Oh yeah, right,
and
exactly.
open garbage and dumps
Sure,
that
sure.
they just burn the stuff. It's something that I learned a lot about when I lived in Mexico and Guatemala because of that reason, that you're always suffering with sinus infections. You're always struggling with, I never had a problem with it, but everybody I knew had intestinal bugs. I think what my
Keeps you
attitude,
skinny anyway.
well, yeah, for sure. But what I learned early on is I just ate everything that the locals ate,
Right.
went through it, and then came out the other side and didn't have any lingering after effects. So I was even able to drink the water in Mexico.
Yeah. Well, that's what do you call it? Terrain theory.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
put yourself
which
in
I
the
didn't know about at
terrain.
the time, but I just assumed that, I'll just eat what you eat and then I'll be
It's like
fine.
when-
Because well, I noticed, excuse me, that the other missionaries wouldn't eat what the Mexicans were eating.
Right.
They had their own food, or they would go uptown to restaurants and eat restaurant food. And
As if that's safer.
right, well, for them it was, but then they would eat the regular food that we were all eating, and then they'd get sick from it.
Yeah. Reminds me when I was in Siberia, they were like, don't brush your teeth with, use bottled water.
Right. Yep.
And I'm like, we were like, yeah, that's baloney.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we're going to get whatever's here.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do, I don't know what it is. Is it diphtheria or whatever you get in the water?
Mm.
Some bacterial thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we're going to brush our teeth with the water. I don't know. But you know what we did is we drank all their fermented stuff.
Sure.
Because, that's how they
Mhm.
treat it, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just like brewing alcohol. But they did,
Yeah.
all the milk stuff is fermented. Kefir is big.
Yeah.
Then they have this stuff by the roadside. It's called kvass, which is
Yeah,
some kind
I'm
of,
familiar with it.
I think it's kind of like kombucha. I don't know.
Mhm.
Except they just kind of brew it by the side of the
Mhm.
road. They put it in these
Yeah.
big tanks and they
Yep.
just, I guess it's just from the heat,
Mm-hmm.
and it just ferments in the tank and you just drink it. And
Yeah.
it's bubbly, so there's something fermented in there.
There you go. Yeah, it's bubbly. I mean,
So I was like, we're not going to have a problem. We're getting all the same kind of, terrain kind of
Mhm.
stuff. We ate all the food they ate. We drank the stuff that they drank.
Right.
Shopped at their grocery store.
Actually, I've
Didn't-
had kvass before. I bought
Have
it.
you?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I think
well,
you can. I think it's available stateside. I don't know.
Yeah, you can buy it it's bottled, and it's the same as buying bottled kombucha. So it's processed and marketed and branded for American taste buds. So
And probably, what do you call it? Pasteurized.
Mhm.
It's like, well, there you go. That destroyed any benefit.
actually, there's
that
a
it had.
brand called Kvass that makes kombucha.
What?
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know. I always wondered if it was the same thing. Because that was before kombucha took off here,
Mhm.
that I was in Russia.
Yeah, that kind of came and went pretty quick. The whole kombucha rush.
No, it's still
Interesting.
big. We've
Is
got,
it?
what do they call it? The scobies,
Yeah.
We've got those things.
Which, by
Yeah.
the way, if you ever want to dress up the smells around your house, just have some SCOBY laying around and
Mm-hmm.
make your own kombucha. And then once you get there, you can graduate up to kimchi and just
Oh, yeah. I totally
the
want to
cherry
get
on
into
top.
that. Where you bury
Mhm.
the crock in the yard.
Mhm.
Yeah. Why are we talking about this? Does this have to do with the show? I don't know.
Because you
We're just
brought up
warming
gay
up.
bathhouses, and it
Oh,
just evolved
and
into
you tried to
Kvass.
change the subject right away.
I didn't
Okay,
try.
gotcha.
I just noted that we were discussing E. coli and being random abstracts. That's how these things go. But that being said, then, I think we've cleared out all the trolls and lingerers. We're back into Dostoevsky this week to continue our reading of the parable of the Grand Inquisitor.
Mhm.
Where we left off in the last episode was the introduction by the Grand Inquisitor of the three temptations of Christ in the wilderness by Satan, and how we noted that that's an example for the baptized life.
It is.
And to sum up, the Grand Inquisitor notes to the stranger, who is not named, but we know who he is,
Mhm.
that the eternal spirit, as the Grand Inquisitor refers to Satan, really offers the perfect deal that every human being wants and longs for and prays for. And by rejecting that deal, Jesus essentially guarantees that no one will follow him.
Yeah.
And really at root then, the problem that the Grand Inquisitor has with Jesus is freedom. You brought freedom, and over the last 15 centuries, we've managed to nail everything down. We've got this under control, and we don't need you anymore.
Right. Making that deal with the devil. I know that's
Mhm.
kind of a trope, right, that we have. It's
Mhm.
in pop culture. You've got
Yeah.
the
The
devil went
Crossroads
down to
Demon,
Georgia and the crossroads.
Robert
yeah.
Johnson, yeah.
Somebody I heard suggested that Bob Dylan actually took it.
Mhm. He's
You
on
know,
the
and then-
list. There's a documentary about it.
Is there? Okay.
Of course, yeah.
And we've been talking about demonic stuff on and off here, maybe
Mhm.
offline too, and just like how real is it? I've had people ask me,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, it doesn't necessarily matter because you can
Right.
kind of make it real.
Well, here's the thing. One, I know people in the music industry at different levels, and every one of them has said separately the exact same thing, is that pop stars aren't they're created. They don't just come out of nowhere. The music industry is an industry, and it makes stars. Number two,
Right.
read his autobiography, Dylan's first volume, where he openly admits he ripped off, literally stole songs and riffs from other folk musicians in the early 60s. He went and visited Woody Guthrie in the asylum, the sanitarium, when he was dying, in order to essentially steal ideas from Guthrie. Because I think Ginsberg talks about this, that what he did, what Bob Dylan did, is he studied, for example, the shamanic breathing patterns of the shaman, of whirling dervishes, the cyclical breathing where you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth.
Yeah.
Create this pattern. And that's why he sings the way he does. And so you can listen to his voice and say, that's not a good voice.
With the nasally kind of thing?
But what he's doing is circular breathing, and it creates a rhythm and a pattern, and it's mesmerizing.
And then that becomes your stick, right? That
he's got that cadence, but it mesmerizes you on purpose. And so he studied the greatest songwriters of his generation, Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and then Phil Ochs and others that were kind of famous before. They were in the coffee house scene in the 50s.
Right.
And he literally stole. Like Phil Ochs says, he would come over to my apartment and steal my albums. And then I would go see him sing in a coffee shop, and he'd be singing my songs. But he'd be saying, this is a song I wrote. And then he would steal them. And so a lot of the songs that he got famous for early on, just like Led Zeppelin did, he stole it without accreditation. And so he basically just aggregated all the best music from the scene he was in, and then left, and then represented it out in New York as his own music.
Right.
So it's not just that he made a deal with the devil. It's that he just lied, cheated, and stealed and defrauded people of their property to get famous.
Well, and I've thought about this because, he'll start singing a song and I'll be like, how am I still listening to the same song?
Right.
You had that Time Out of Mind was the one that really caught me on that, was Highlands. It's a whole side on the LP.
Yeah, right.
It's like 16 minutes or something like that. And it just, I'm not even sure what it's necessarily about.
But
and
you
it doesn't
find
matter.
yourself to be completely transfixed by the song.
You used that word, mesmerized. He's been doing that the last few albums.
Named
Rough
after
and Rowdy.
the famous mentalist, Anton Mesmer.
Oh, right. Exactly.
That's where it comes from, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and that's just
Out
been
in
a
the woods,
thing.
worshipping trees, by the way. Look that up.
So you get these
story.
6, 7, 8 minute songs that just go, and they're ballads of a sort, right?
Well, go listen to Inagata Davida, the full 23, 24 minute song.
I suppose. I hadn't thought
Turn the
about
lights
that.
off, crank it up. If you have headphones, perfect. You will be mesmerized.
You don't even need drugs. No.
No, it is drugs. Highway Star by Deep Purple's that way. I mean, there's lots of songs like that where they figured out the formula, especially in the 60s.
So it's this idea of, that you can be held captive to something.
Well, right.
Or to an idea.
Well, we talked about this with sound frequencies. And understanding how sound controls and manipulates our brain waves and our patterns of thinking.
Right. So is it just like a misuse of the tool? Like words can be used, to guide, to faith and to wisdom, to knowledge.
From the word spelling, meaning to use words to,
So if you use it, for occult purposes, I guess would be.
Well, that's what mass media does. They cast spells. There's that viral video that goes around where
they're all telling the same story.
Yeah, where the two newscasters, and then it just branches out into more and more.
They all had the same script. Yeah.
Right. It's a spell. They're casting a spell over you. Whether they understand what they're doing is a quote unquote spell casting. But this is what Luther means in the Second Commandment when he uses the word witchcraft for the misuse of God's name. When you use God's name for witchcraft, we think kind of bubble, toil, and trouble, and the three witches at the beginning of Macbeth.
A boil and a hat and
exactly.
pointy nose.
The Wicked Witch of the West, that kind of stuff. But it's not. To cast a spell, you and I are in the business actually of spell casting. To put it vulgarly,
Except, I'm gonna push back a little bit on this. I forget what it's called, but it's physiognomy, right? Isn't that right?
Physiognomy?
Physiognomy, right. Like eyes have been a thing for me. I've been noticing this. There's a particular eye thing, and they don't blink. And this was on Stranger Things because what's her name? Who Winona, the writer, not Winona, her daughter, Judd. There was Naomi Judd, Winona Ryder. It is Winona Ryder. That's the daughter. You know Winona Ryder? Crazy Eyes?
Yeah. Winona
she had
Ryder.
that. Yeah, I was thinking of her mom.
From the state of Minnesota because she was born in Winona, Minnesota.
Oh, I've been there. Yeah.
Former
Okay, I didn't know she was
Johnny
named after.
Depp, former kleptomaniac.
Right. And
Crazy
you remember that appearance? It was probably at a Grammy or
Mhm.
Oscar or something, where she was
had
just
too many meds. Yeah.
right.
too
But
many
the crazy eyes, because it's
Mhm.
the same eyes that you see in some, unfortunately, in some mass tragedy events.
Correct.
Sometimes
Yeah.
with guns, sometimes other
Mhm.
ways, and like you start to see these same eyes.
SSR
like,
eyes. That's what I call them. Literally SSR.
oh, okay, maybe.
eyes. 'Cause,
Yeah, maybe. Right, and
from the psych meds.
but it's that same kind of like, what deal did they make?
Mhm.
Unintentionally or
Yeah.
intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea that you can make a deal, with, if not the devil, the demonic.
Well, that's
These
C.S.
people
Lewis's
are held
point in Mere
captive.
Christianity. I think it's
Hmm.
Mere Christianity, where he says if you want to know about the devil, you don't have to go looking for him; he'll come and find you.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and they called it the Holy Spirit.
Right. But
Melody.
and that's my point is that, and to follow up with that, is that comedians talk about this all the time, and that's where I've learned it from, is that comedians will tell you that when you're up on stage, for example, the audience is giving you permission to control their mind.
Hmm.
You're casting a spell, you're weaving the spell, and the punchline then is the formulation, the kind of apex, the pinnacle.
Well, they'll
of the-
give you a couple minutes to captivate them. Right.
Exactly. And then you
Yeah.
hit it, and then they'll give you another couple minutes to hit it. And so a great comedy set, let's say an hour and 6-minute comedy set, will go by fast, so fast that you're like, oh, that went so fast.
And it
Okay,
doesn't work the same on TV as it does in person.
No. On TV, you look like the pod people in the Dark Crystal,
Mm-hmm.
where their eyes just go milky white. But you see that with great preaching. You and I have both been in the presence of, quote unquote, a great preacher where you didn't think during the sermon. You weren't critiquing the sermon, which is why when you listen to sermons that don't do that to you, you're so hostile towards them and judgmental.
And you realize that
Because-
sermon was half the length of a sermon you usually preach that you don't even remember
Exactly.
because it went by so quickly.
Right.
Because you're in
And
the
as
moment.
Jesus himself says, the sheep know the voice of their shepherd, and they will come when he's calling them. So when you're preaching the word of God and the Holy Spirit is in control of the words and in control of the hearing,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes this thing that it's intended to be used for.
For
But
good. Yeah.
For good, for godly purposes. But keeping it within the church, when you see a pastor cast a spell over the congregation, whether it be through the preaching, through the music, whatever it might be, you also see the opposite effect of how
Yeah.
vulgar and gross it is that you see all of these people under the spell of this preacher. And you point out, hey, nothing you said points to Christ and forgiveness of sins.
Yeah. But how willingly the people will go along with
But
it
how
too.
willingly, because that's our pastor. He's a great preacher, and there's 30,000 of us in this stadium. So of course.
Or they're just saying the things that you want
Mm-hmm.
them to say.
Right. They're just aping you, which, again, to Dr. Luther's point in the councils and the churches,
Mm.
the devil is God's ape. So you can ape God, you can mimic God, but the Holy Spirit will give you the discernment to test the spirits in such a way to go, that's not Christ crucified for the forgiveness of sins.
Right. Yeah.
It's
So
about Jesus. It sounds good.
So the temptation is, this is what you want, except there's a catch.
Right.
Right. And if you don't ask what the catch is,
Right. Right.
that's the devil's bargain, right?
It is 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So that being said, then that's kind of what the Grand Inquisitor does, is he's pointing out to the stranger, and we're going to dive specifically into the temptations this time, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially he's like, yeah, you came and you did some stuff and you set people free, and that was the wrong thing to do. And as I noted, that's Nietzsche's problem with Jesus, is you're not following God's justice. You're not following your own rules if you are who they say you are,
Mm-hmm.
because you're forgiving mass murderers just for free. Like, you're just saying, I died for your sins. I shed my blood. You're forgiven. There's no consequences for what he did. And that's
Yeah.
that's Ivan Karamazov points then with the innocent children is, it's not that I don't believe in God. It's that I simply refuse to acknowledge he's God because this is happening in the world.
Yeah.
How can you say there's a God when there's children being ripped to shreds by dogs? Which
Well,
we may
and
not have gotten to yet, but we're coming to it.
Right. And the perception, of Jesus is that he actually does violence to Moses, to the law.
Right.
That he's not just opposed to it, but that he actually is set against it.
Well, that's, Stephen Paulson's point constantly is Jesus forgives sins outside the law.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that offends us. But yet his logic is, but I gave you the law. I'm the author of the law. If I choose to function outside the law, this goes back to the sheep and the pen and the hired hands and the wolves.
Right.
Jesus doesn't say, I'm going to build you a better pen. He actually leads you out into the pasture and says, don't worry, if the wolves attack, I'll let them eat me.
Right. Yeah, we dealt with this morning in talking about inheritance, right? And the man comes and is like, help divide the inheritance between my brother.
Right.
And Jesus is like, that I'm not a judge or arbitrator.
Right.
You're like, what?
And I think what it comes down to, again, is that on the Warrior Priest podcast this week, I read Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings on how Tolkien, and I texted you, I'm like, he's really the only Christian I've ever read who actually baptizes the old Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, pagan virtues of honor, loyalty, and worth, and then throws out what isn't a part of the Christian ethos and does it in narrative form in the Lord of the Rings in such a way that you go, this is brilliant. This is pristine, chef's kiss.
Right.
And
rather than embracing the pagan worship of like I was telling you was in Northmen. I hadn't watched it until recently. It's like, whoa, they embrace it like this is a good thing.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like play.
Tolkien considers it like dark magic or something.
Right. Well, that's who Sauron is, and that's what Saruman represents, is the old world, as he calls it, which is really the pre-Christian Germanic ethos. And his primary critique, and it goes to your point, is this, that in the pre-Christian ethos, a gift is given publicly to show the worth of the individual within the tribe. And that shows that's a reward for loyalty and honor.
So it's by way of law, right?
Exactly, but the gift then is always an obligation because it accompanies loyalty. Show me loyalty and I'll give you a gift.
Like Santa Claus, right?
Well, then Tolkien, in his Beowulf lectures, points out that's literally the antithesis of the definition of a gift, because a gift is unconditional. So, in the Battle of Maldon, in Beowulf and the primary protagonist in the Battle of Maldon sacrifices their friends to gain glory, to gain victory, because the loyalty of their kinsmen brethren is rewarded by them being sacrificed in the battle for the glory of the hero. Whereas Gandalf, for example, sacrifices himself on the bridge at Khazad-dûm fighting the Balrog to save his kinsmen brethren, the fellowship, so they can go on. And so Tolkien, like Aragorn's relationship with the Éowyn, shows the kinsman brethren's selflessness, that is the Christian ethos. And then he says this pre-Christian ethos, this Germanic ethos of, no, it's all about selfishness and about seeking earthly glory so that the gods will pay attention to you and then hopefully when you die, let you into Valhalla. Whereas my God rewards selflessness, as exemplified by Jesus on the cross. So when you live a life of selflessness and devotion and fidelity to the Lord, it's not temporary and it's not earthly glory, it's eternal glory.
Right.
And as a consequence,
it's of a different kind,
It's of a different kind. So but the fundamental problem then that we have is that we're all pagans. And my example is this podcast. Because what is the purpose of your earthly actions? And seeking earthly glory, that your name might live on forever, your reputation might live on forever.
No, I'll actually just put the banner back up.
There we go. And that's what really podcasting is, as I said, I started the Warrior Priest podcast so that my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren have a audio record, a visual record of me. So if they ever want to know what did he think or who was he, they can just go on the internet and find
At least what did he think on Wednesday, July 6, 2022?
Exactly. Right. But that's paganism 101, is how do I maintain my glory forever? Well, you have to do things.
His memory lives on in our hearts.
Right. Versus Jesus, go into your closet where your Father sees you in secret and pray to him. That's the opposite. Literally such an antithesis to earthly glory and attention seeking that the Grand Inquisitor is simply saying, Jesus, by setting people free, there's no obligation to come back to church. There's no obligation to be a part of the institution. You know they're not going to go run and look for a preacher. And Jesus is like, no, but I've got this. My spirit will lead them to me.
Right, but I think there's also that, that necessity that you not be, have a permanent glory.
Yeah.
That because this life is impermanent.
Yeah,
right?
It's temporary.
Yeah, and so, if no part of you lives on, it does in the sense of your children, grandchildren, etc. But the memory of you is not even the real you.
No, it's their perspective and their perception of the real.
Well, hopefully it's wisdom, knowledge, that's carried forward.
But you and I have done enough funerals at this point and talked with enough families after the deceased has been buried to know that
Neither the visage in the coffin,
yeah,
nor what they tell you the
Right.
person was represents the real person.
correct. Exactly.
They're both like some kind of, well,
And if you want to know where Paganism
embalmed version.
101 like rears its ugly head, it's actually in the eulogy at most funerals.
Oh yeah.
Because what do you speak of? Earthly glory, which leads to their heavenly reward. Which, by the way, as Tolkien points out correctly, is hopelessness. You're literally throwing words into the void, into the abyss, and hoping that the answer is, don't worry, there's a good place for you too.
It's the original retroactive continuity.
It really is. But also notice then, we use this language all the time uncritically, which is, well, my doctor saved my life. No, she didn't. She prolonged it, but she didn't save it.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's good.
She saved my life. I had cancer. Yeah, but you're still going to die. So she didn't save anything. She might have prolonged it, but she didn't save anything.
Right.
And again, it seems innocuous or semantic, but there's only one who can give you life and sustain your life, and that's Jesus, the Word of God who created life. Which is why, again, there's no argument for Christians about abortion. Life begins when God speaks, period.
When and where he wills, right?
It's not when it's fertilized. It's not when it's a zygote. It's not when it has a heartbeat. It's not when it's in its first or second or third trimester. It has nothing to do with earthly philosophy. That's the God science, the God of nihilism, the God of nothing that says you're an accident and your life is meaningless and valueless and there are no higher things.
Yeah, divides and chops up into pieces.
Right.
And, yeah.
Which, by the way, the new God, and I talked about this on Wednesday in the podcast too, go watch American Gods or read the book by Neil Gaiman, who he nails this. The new God media has 1,000 faces, speaks 1,000 language, not tangible, not graspable, and offers you nothing other than eat this, sacrifice for this. And when you're done with that, I've got something else for you. It's all shock. It's all provocation. That's all it is.
Right, but it's also abstraction.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So,
and which is why it's so dehumanizing.
Right. So everything is like, what's the latest controversy? When's the latest bit of hope come? And it's just stringing you along into eternity. Yeah. And never actually dealing with reality.
Correct.
Like, does it matter like who blew up the guide stone or whether it was lightning or something like that? Does any of it matter? No.
No.
Who like, okay, yeah, so this, rich guy, set him up back in 1980.
The Jesuits set him up back there.
Okay, Jesuits, whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because it's just words on a piece of rock, and you've made it into this icon of like
correct. Well, those who
globalism.
erected it and those who announced that they're following the plan that's on the guide stones, again, like Satan.
That's probably more important. Yes,
that's what matters. Right. Ultimately, what matters is that they believe it.
There's actually people who believe it and will do things to enact them, to bring it into reality. Right. Correct.
And that's why I noted, say what you want about the old gods, but at least they were tangible and graspable. At least you
kind of knew what they stood for. Yeah.
Well, at least like again in the Northman, like he was working towards something, and the mystical realism of the movie, which we talked about before in the last podcast, maybe. If you want to see mystical realism, go watch that movie because at least 20 minutes in, you're like, is any of this even real? Like, is this all his memory? And if it is his memory, he was 8 when it happened. So is this even like a believable memory? And then, of course, in the end, in the third act, you're like, oh, no, not now. There's even more doubt in my mind. And that final showdown at the volcano, you're like, is any of this real? And does it matter? Does it matter?
It's so like what grandiose and
it's
contrived.
And even the Valkyrie shows up, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is so operatic. But that's the point is they believed that stuff. And there's people to this day in Sweden, Norway, and Finland, they believe that stuff still.
As the reviews said.
Yeah.
Well, and there's obviously some drug use involved as well.
Oh, yeah.
Herbs.
A lot of drug use, a lot of mushrooms and Rhodolian.
There's things being boiled in pots and they're drinking it 100%. And then going
and they nailed
berserk.
it. They nailed that too.
Yeah.
But my point is then, is that we can't help but not only think that way, but believe that way and construct a worldview and an ethos on what we call paganism.
Right.
But really, again, it's just a rejection of Christ. Like whatever is a rejection of God's word, find your favorite religion, right? Mine is
it's man
Norse
seeking
Celtic.
Meaning, but apart from Christ. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you see all of the attributes of God's word. You see all the tropes of God's word. But you see it then spun up, going back to what we said about spellcasting and witchcraft and how it's applied uncritically in the present tense. In the old days, at the very least, they had Freya, Now you've got media. You don't even have Medea, the goddess of illusion. You have
Right.
media, which is nothingness. It's just nothing. And so, of course, people become what they worship, a la Jeremiah the prophet, who says, you worship nothing and therefore you become Havel, nothing. And so we have an entire society whose cultural ethos is literally nothing.
Yeah. Like Solomon, aged in Ecclesiastes.
Havel, everything is Havel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
transitory,
And
temporary.
I'm totally
Right.
sympathetic to his
Oh yeah,
assertion
after
there.
the last 2.5 years and looking around and going, is really no one's thinking about this. No one's going to ask this question.
Right. But it is life apart from Christ. I mean, I think that's
100%.
He gets that right.
Right.
This is what it is. It's all pointless.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. And yeah, it's frustrating to me because I see the churches suffering from nihilism, and we've talked about this.
Yeah.
And no one wants to talk about it. And I'm not allowed to write about it or talk about it.
That it is
That
the
it's
ethos.
nihilism. And the roots of nihilism, go all the way back to the Enlightenment.
Like, how could you actually promote the extermination of billions of people, right?
Right.
Like, promote, maybe that's too strong of a word, but through many means and
propagate,
methods
but
to propagate. Yeah. Like, well, because you don't actually see any intrinsic value in any life, never mind human life.
Right.
Like, well, how could you come up with that? That's actually how a lot of people think. It's like, I don't care if that's a life in my womb. I don't want it.
Right.
It's like, well, how do you come to that conclusion?
Well, just not even that one I have. I posted this morning, when I was born in 1971, I received 8 vaccines.
Yeah, right.
8 total.
I know.
Now it's 72 in the first 6
And I know what
months
those
of
8
life.
did to me.
Right, exactly. Me too. I had an infection, and my mom had to I had a 4-pound leg, and my mom had to sit up with me at night and squeeze pus out of my leg for 2
I have a
weeks.
genetic disease whose occurrences rapidly increased beginning in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, they're
Right.
still rapidly increasing as far as it was 1 in a million. And now it's, I don't even know, it's a lot less than that.
Right. No, statistically, you go, wait a minute. I'm not saying correlation equals
Right. But it was
causation,
pretty static as far as the occurrences.
or
from
causation equals correlation. We can't even talk about it in the church.
Yeah.
We
so
can't
for
seek to
6,
discern the spirits in the church. We're not allowed to discern anymore.
well,
we're not.
no, well, it's because we can't, the church doesn't deal with things physical. It only deals with things
Correct.
spiritual.
Exactly.
Right. So we're not talking about day-to-day life. We're not talking about families, relationships, health, well-being. We're
Right.
not talking
We're not allowed
about
to.
about work, society, civilization. We can't talk about any of those things,
Right.
Because that's all just physical, and just
Well, I was
guided
told that
by
by someone point blank. Again, stick to preaching about Jesus and stay out of my life.
Jesus, who was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, lived and
Right.
breathed and
Right.
walked upon the earth and
And
actually
ultimately
healed the
then,
sick. And
we'll use this as a segue into the text. That's the problem with the Grand Inquisitor. His problem with the stranger is you're here in the flesh and you just raised a girl from the dead. And
it would have
everyone
been a
saw it.
lot easier if you had just stayed in the heavens.
Yeah, just stay up in heaven. We'll spiritualize you. You'll still get your worship.
Hmm.
Right? Again,
And
like Odin in the
with no point.
in American Gods, Odin. He's like, yeah, I just want a few worshipers, man. I just need enough worshipers to keep me going. And then he goes and visits the God of War in the first season, and the God of War is like, I got this nailed down.
Along with death and blood. Yes, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So, continuing with the text then. 15 centuries have gone by. We can see that in these 3 questions, the 3 temptations of Jesus in the wilderness, everything was so precisely divined and foretold, and has proved so completely true that to add to them or subtract anything from them is impossible. That's how good Satan's temptations are. They're everything that we desire, everything that we hope for, everything we pray for, actually. So now the quote. Decide yourself who was right, you or the one who questioned you. Recall the first question. Its meaning, though not literally, was this. You want to go into the world, and you are going empty-handed with some promise of freedom, which they in their simplicity and innate lawlessness cannot even comprehend, which they dread and fear. For nothing has ever been more insufferable for man and for human society than freedom. But do you see these stones in this bare, scorching desert? Turn them into bread, and mankind will run after you like sheep, grateful and obedient. Though eternally trembling lest you withdraw your hand and your loaves cease for them. But you did not want to deprive man of freedom and rejected the offer. For what sort of freedom is it, you reasoned, if obedience is bought with loaves of bread? Which, by the way, to come back around, that is Sauron. Sauron gives gifts of the rings of power, but the gift, like when you ask the mafia to do you a favor, comes with a condition. At some point in the future,
James Caan died, right? So I was thinking of Godfather.
Yeah, exactly. So was I.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this for you. I give you this gift, but I'm going to come to you in the future, and I'm going to ask you for a favor, and you cannot say no. Right?
You almost
I'm
got
going to make
the
you
quote.
an offer
Yeah.
you cannot refuse to go with the Godfather.
Yeah.
That's what Satan does to you. He offers you the desires of your heart. But we were talking about that, I think, last episode too, about genies. It's like in the original mythology of genies, they don't offer you 3 free wishes for their freedom.
Mm-mm.
Instead, what they essentially do is put you in like a virtual reality simulation.
Yeah, they enslave you. Yeah.
Where you think you're living out your wishes, but in reality, you're in this kind of like stasis, and your body is dying.
Right, they're feeding off of you. Yeah.
Yes, they're parasites, and it's horrific. Which is why, the moral of the original story was, be careful what you wish for. That's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because you'll end up being fed on by parasites.
I was thinking here, the connection, I don't know that I've made it before. It's pretty obvious now between turn these stones into loaves with the temptation and then the end of the feeding of the 5,000 story.
Yes.
Where Jesus withdraws because he perceives that they want to make him, a
King.
bread king. Yeah. A king of bread.
King. Yep. Bread king.
So he recognizes that even in feeding these 5,000, in his compassion, right? He has compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd.
And this happens with, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, and then I was just going to say, but he recognizes that they're not going to get it right. And then when he goes and teaches in the synagogue in Capernaum right after that, he's like, this is exactly the problem here, is that you want me to just feed your hungry bellies, and I'm here to say whoever eats, of my flesh and drinks of my blood has life in him. Exactly. That's the only way you can live, and it is a physical and spiritual eating, of course, in the supper. And you're like, yeah, I see how this is a problem. That you're just going to be like a normal king? No, I'm not. But I can see how you could get confused since I just fed you with a bunch of bread and fish miraculously. Yep. Yeah.
They do the same thing to Joshua.
Oh, yeah.
You and your son will be our kings. And Joshua says, neither my son nor my grandson will be your king, because we know he would not entrust himself to his people. Because why did they want Joshua to be the king? Because he's a warlord.
Yeah.
Not because God appointed him to rescue the Israelites from the Midianites, but rather you're a great warlord.
Not because of his faithfulness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think actually breaking this down, then, if you read the 3 temptations in the wilderness and then take those and apply them as a hermeneutic in Scripture, at least one of those 3 temptations will come out in every single demand that Israel makes throughout their history.
Yeah. Of God or of their king. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so...
Or prophet, too, for that matter.
Yeah.
Maybe even judges.
Definitely the judges.
To work this out.
Again, they kind of pull that stuff with Gideon.
Yeah, they do.
So but again, it's for freedom that I have set you free. And as we noted then, like with the parable of the shepherd and the sheep and the hired hands and so forth, if we're just obedient sheep, everything will be fine, right? No, because the wolves don't care about your laws, and it's easy to get a gun.
As we learned, Japan has the most strict gun laws, and then look, you can just 3D print one now.
Yeah, and just walk up behind the former prime minister, and just shoot him.
Right, but the point here is like with bread. Bread is good, it sustains the body. Actually, guns are just a tool. They're morally neutral. It's how they're used that either makes them good or bad.
I have a couple of paperweights at home right now.
Well, the same 3D printed shotgun used to kill a former prime minister in Japan is the one that's being used for a woman to protect her family in Somalia.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're like, and it's from the same downloaded design off the internet, right? Yep. It's like, yeah, I know that's a ghost gun or whatever. It's not registered. It doesn't even matter.
It doesn't.
The point is how is it used?
Right.
Right. Is it used in this case, to lead to faith or actually to lead away from faith when it comes to the bread?
Yeah. I was just reading last night, since you brought it up, that I can't remember what country it is, but the rebels in that country, all of their weapons are 3D printed. Because they just don't have access to caches of military weapons. And so they just printed their own.
Well, and the problem is going to be even these plastic 3D printed weapons can actually be superior.
100%.
You know, and yeah, it takes a little while to print them, but
again, wherever there's a necessity,
I'm almost tempted to
innovation.
just get a 3D printer, but you know.
Well, they're gonna have to outlaw 3D printers eventually. So
Well, I did find an outfit that does what they say, but that has no KYA, and you're like, what? Or KYC. Like, what? You know this from crypto. Know your customer.
Yeah.
So that's when the business is required to take information about the customer that's buying the thing.
exactly.
They're a no KYC 3D printing company. I'm like, oh, okay. So they're not going to keep record of who they sold it to. I wonder why they would want to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Free market capitalism, baby. But freedom. Freedom scares us. And so we do everything possible to take away freedom.
Well, isn't this always the case, especially with the freedom of the gospel, right? Forgiveness of sins. Well, it's going to be misused.
Right.
And you're like, well, yes. But does that mean that it's still not the freedom that's given, and that it's not an inherently good thing, even if it's misused for evil?
Well, we need gospel-only zones. That's the problem. If we just had gospel-only zones so people knew where they could go to get the gospel.
To be safe in the gospel?
To be safe, that would then, here, you can be free over here in this area, because this is a gospel-free zone.
Yeah.
But outside the zone, the gospel's just everywhere. It's crazy.
I've had this occurrence now multiple times. I'll give one specific that was done publicly, not the private ones, where where I said, well, why don't you forgive your politician? Like, call him up and tell him I forgive you for what you did. Like, we can't do that. I'm like, why not? Well, you're not free to do that. Well, they're not going to hear. Well, it's like, I don't care if they believe you or if they just. It's like, why is there no forgiveness in civil life? Oh, it's because we've had this bifurcation, artificial, between life in this world and life in civil estate and the life of faith.
Well, and you nailed it. That's the fundamental flaw, in my opinion. The fundamental flaw in all of Protestantism is that they've spiritualized Jesus out of creation.
Out of life, yeah.
Out of life, exactly. And therefore, where does he live? In your heart.
For what reason? Because he makes me feel better.
Yeah, exactly. To give my life meaning and value and purpose, which is, again, that's just hopelessness. The funeral director at the funeral I did last Monday noted the only clergy that showed up during COVID were the Roman Catholics. And I said, yeah, because they have an incarnational theology.
Yeah, that's true.
They have to show up. I said, Protestants won't show up because they've spiritualized God out of creation and life, and therefore they don't need to show up.
We probably should read Kleinig's book where he has on the body. It just came out. John Kleinig, Australian theologian. We've had him. Have we done it on the show?
We read something he wrote, I think.
It was originally called
we read his translation of Sazen.
Lutheran Theology of the Body, but the publisher is Lexham, so they're like, no, we're going to call it Protestant Theology of the Body. And a lot of Lutherans are upset about this, and you're like, whatever, it's still the Lutheran doctrine,
right?
Teaching the scriptural doctrine.
That's what happens when you become obtuse and pedantic.
It's like he's going to sell a lot more copies. A lot more people are going to be exposed to it,
correct?
And maybe actually believe that vocationally our bodies are given to us as a gift to be used for benefit of the neighbor.
And as a sidebar, since you noted it, thank you to everybody who bought the Wither Tongue emails, because I'm actually going to get royalty checks at the end of this month, and it just came out. And I got my first royalty checks for Crucifying Religion last fall, like 2.5 years after it came out.
that was a slow burn.
Well, some of it was marketing and 1517 building up their publishing. And actually, there's some really exciting news that I can't talk about, but it's coming next year. Really big news for the organization. But no, because I said on the show, I thought 5 people would really get the conceit of the book. I really didn't think anybody was going to appreciate it.
Yeah, but you put C.S. Lewis in the subtitle, and that's a key
lot,
word.
But
people are like, oh, something like C.S. Lewis, that's great.
Yes, but the feedback I've gotten from people has been like, this was great. This was super helpful, and I loved it. I'm like, really? Did you understand it? They're like, of course I understood it. I'm like, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. But anyway, thanks to everybody for that.
I gave you a hat tip on Christian History Almanac because I'm on the Saturday show this week. Mostly just self-serving so that Dan could figure out how to use technology. So he had me on there. But yeah, he's going to be interviewing like something about in this case it was a Lutheran, right? He wanted to interview a Lutheran. But what does it mean to be a Lutheran? That kind of thing. And he asked like, what books would you recommend? I did give you a hat tip to your book because I think that's what was missing in the marketing of Crucifying Religion is that it's like, well, it is why I'm a Lutheran. I mean, that's But from a practical and philosophical perspective.
Who wrote that book originally? That Australian guy. Why I'm a Lutheran. It's our friend.
John not Australian. No. It's
Wasn't he?
It was one of the Prices. I think it's he's now deceased. The deceased Price
there's another
from
book
Minnesota.
Right. No, there's that one. But there's another book. Maybe it's not Why I'm a Lutheran, but there's another book by an Australian guy that Plus recommends all the time. I own it.
Oh,
It's out of
Andrew,
print.
what's his name? Yeah.
Yeah. I
forget
can't
his
remember
name.
what the name of it is, though. But it's something similar to that. But basically, he just explains, like, I didn't really believe anything. And then
What are we talking about? We're talking about good books, and we were talking about the body, right?
Mhm. Theology
And
of the body.
spiritualizing away
Right.
Jesus, into the heavens.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So freedom. Freedom actually locates you in the body.
Right. In life.
Yeah. So you rejected it, and therefore you could not buy, as you noted, he's not their bread god.
Hmm.
So you objected that man does not live by bread alone. But do you know that in the name of this very earthly bread, the spirit of the earth will rise against you and fight with you and defeat you? And everyone will follow him, exclaiming, "Who can compare to this beast? For he has given us fire from heaven." So Satan is Prometheus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. Do you know that centuries will pass and mankind will proclaim with the mouth of its wisdom and its science that there is no crime and therefore no sin, but only hungry men? Go to our Telegram group and view the recently deleted article on the UN website saying that we need hungry, poor people in the world. Yes,
Well,
the
it's
United
the
Nations-
original tool of manipulation. is it
Exactly. I was
not?
going to say the United Nations actually published the article, and then when they got blowback, they called it satire.
Well, it was a repost too. They had posted
Yes.
it back like in 2008 or something,
Yeah.
and they thought it would be appropriate to post it again now. I'm like,
Yeah.
Jeez.
There we go.
You people.
Satan. Feed them first, then ask virtue of them. This is Plato, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't appeal to a man unless his stomach is full first. He won't listen to you
Bread and circuses.
unless you give him something to eat, bread and circuses. So that is what they will write on the banner they raise against you, and by which your temple will be destroyed.
Wasn't it Barack Obama said it's the economy, stupid?
I can't even keep it
I think it
straight
is.
anymore.
I think it is. I mean, which is the same thing. It's like every election. That's ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah.
Who's going to feed my, keep food
Right.
in my belly? They
Exactly.
don't care how it comes, whether it's through work or through
No.
government handout. It doesn't
Right.
matter as
Right.
long as I'm not hungry.
Yeah.
I can fuel up my car so I can go on vacation. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you just saw this in California. The people of California actually voted to raise gas prices. I texted people I know in California and asked, WTF?
Yeah.
Question
right.
mark? Like, why would you vote to pay more for gas? Well, because of Russia and Ukraine and inflation. I'm like, that doesn't actually solve any of those things.
Well, it doesn't even follow logically.
It doesn't follow any logic.
Hmm.
But again, the offer. And they're all getting checks. That's all that matters.
Yeah, $1,200, wasn't it?
Yeah, $1,200 in place of the billions sent overseas.
And sell your soul for a pot or pot of
Exactly.
porridge.
Yeah, pot of porridge. In place of your temple, a new edifice will be raised. The terrible Tower of Babel will be raised again. And though, like the former one, this one will not be completed either, still, you could have avoided this new tower and shortened people's suffering by 1,000 years. For it is to us they will come, and after suffering for 1,000 years with their tower, which we've talked about in the past, that the Tower of Babel has actually been rebuilt. It's in Britain.
Oh, I was thinking about the Dark Tower.
That too.
I mean, talk about a weirdo, but I don't understand his political takes, but it does seem. This is Stephen King, by the way. It does seem to understand, the spiritual promise, of
Right.
world power, globalist
Well, he
power.
should understand it since he's been given it.
Apparently, yeah,
He's
And
a useful
endorses it.
idiot as well.
yeah, useful idiot. There you go.
So they will come after suffering for 1,000 years with their tower. They will seek us out again underground in catacombs, hiding. For again, we shall be persecuted and tortured. They will find us and cry out, "Feed us." For those who promised us fire from heaven did not give it. And then we shall finish building their tower. For only he who feeds them will finish it, and only we shall feed them in your name. For we shall lie that it is in your name. Is this not every prosperity gospel preacher ever?
No doubt. Well, and I think the other aspect here is that these old gods, these old idols, they never die.
No.
They just lie in wait, and then they're
Which-
revived.
As I noted, though, it's unfortunate that they have no meat on the bones. They're not graspable. At least in the old days, you had stone and wood. You could get a hold of them. Now
Yeah.
it's just ether.
Right. Yeah, they live virtually.
Yeah. Never will they feed themselves without us. No science will give them bread as long as they remain free. Ooh. No science will give them bread as long as they remain free, but in the end they will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, better that you enslave us, but feed us.
1880, right?
Yeah. They will finally understand that freedom and earthly bread in plenty for everyone are inconceivable together. For never will they be able to share among themselves. They will also be convinced that they are forever incapable of being free, because they are feeble, depraved, non-entities, and rebels. You promised them heavenly bread, but I repeat again, can it compare with earthly bread in the eyes of the weak, eternally depraved, eternally ignoble human race? And if in the name of heavenly bread thousands and tens of thousands will follow you, what will become of the millions and tens of thousands of millions of creatures who will not be strong enough to forego earthly bread for the sake of the heavenly? Jeez, sounds like the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah, right.
Is it that only the tens of thousands of the great and strong are dear to you? And the remaining millions, numerous as the sands of the sea, weak but loving you, should serve only as material for the great and the strong? Jeez.
So we have two things going on here. I mean, we have election, right? Why so few? And then why then the nature of the church, that you have strong and weak within the church. And there does seem to be that element of service. I mean, we're obviously servants of within the church of a sort, right? You know, as ministers, and we end up serving the strong, who end up having to make sure we get food on the table and that kind of thing, right?
I'd actually say it's the opposite. We serve the weak, and we're the ones who are called to be strong in Christ.
Right, but that's not the temptation here. It's the opposite.
No, it's the opposite, which is why the temptation for clergy is to become soft and effeminate and emasculated and weak.
How do we serve? We serve by feeding your hungry belly, right? Giving you what you want. In this case, your ears, right?
Right.
Putting into your ears the things that you'd like to hear. You're a good person, you're doing well.
Which is the proclamation of a soft, weak, effeminate, emasculated preacher.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I mean, the consequence. Our friend Ed about this yesterday. Read Psalm 27.
Yeah.
That is a powerful, strong psalm.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not prayed liturgically in the new lectionary. It's only in the old lectionary. Why are we not allowed to pray imprecatory psalms liturgically? Why are we not allowed to teach them to our people? This is how you pray.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I would say the reason is, I posted something like this on
because we want to castrate social. God.
Well, when you have soft men, soft preachers, you end up with soft families, soft
Correct.
communities, which makes them assailable, right? I mean, you can
ultimately soft churches,
right? Then they can be manipulated,
overrun.
Controlled, victimized, abused, right? Invaded, all of that, right. So it ends up affecting life as much as it does faith.
Well, we no longer distinguish between sympathy and pity. And that's, I think, ultimately at root, what's the problem is that we're pitiful, but we're not sympathetic.
Yeah.
Right? There are people that sympathize with my faith who are not Christians, but they're sympathetic to what I believe. There are also people who pity me for my faith because they see me as being pitiful. That is, you're so weak.
Well, as Paul says, that would be true if Christ had not been raised from the dead.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That pity is accompanied by things like timidity and cowardice, which, as Paul notes, we were not given a spirit of timidity, but of boldness. And so you'll see this play itself out then in the churches, in our homes, in our communities, when you see the spirit of timidity captivate groups versus the spirit of courage. Psalm 27, fresh. Sorry for on the live stream. For those of you listening, I didn't just string together some words, although I'll do that too. But it's Psalm 27.
Right.
Excuse me. Same as with Psalm 18, which is almost like a history lesson in a prayer.
Yeah, those are great.
But again, the tens of thousands of the great and the strong, what are they going to do? Prey upon the weak. They're depraved. They're rebels. But in the end, it is they who will become obedient. They will marvel at us and look upon us as gods, because we, standing at their head, have agreed to suffer freedom and to rule over them. So terrible will it become for them in the end to be free. But we shall say that we are obedient to you and rule in your name. We shall deceive them again. For this time we shall not allow you to come to us. This deceit will constitute our suffering, for we shall have to lie. This is what that first question in the wilderness meant. And this is what you rejected in the name of freedom, which you placed above everything. And yet, this question contains the great mystery of this world. Had you accepted the loaves, you would have answered the universal and everlasting anguish of man as an individual being, and of the whole of mankind together, namely, before whom shall I bow down? We demand freedom, but really what we want is slavery.
Mm-hmm.
We want the illusion of freedom, which, again, it was just the 4th of July. And the most rebellious thing people did was light off fireworks in their backyard.
Illegal fireworks, yes.
Yeah. Ooh, you rebels.
Although I saw the video of the person driving through downtown Minneapolis, shooting the fireworks off on off the car.
Yeah.
That was pretty rebellious. Also pretty dangerous. Okay.
Not in Minneapolis, it's not. It's pretty status quo.
Okay.
There is no law.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking about, this terrible and, awesome God that that the Inquisitor would have us worship, right? Where it's bread. And if you don't give me the bread, then how can I worship you? That's
right.
But connecting everything in life to experience, this is the rejection of the enthusiasm, that Luther has. It's like, if you're only going to believe or have faith or trust when your material needs are met, then, what God could you worship anyway? Because the experience of life is not one of being provided for.
Right.
Well, and of course, it's the deceit of riches is that even those who are well provided for still think they don't have what they need.
Right. How could God let this happen?
Right. It doesn't provide an answer. So the God who's worshipped, through material wealth, is perceived as what? Vindictive, capricious, arbitrary. Yeah.
The old pagan gods.
Right. And so this is what's unique about, the worship of Christ is that, we worship him in his suffering.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, it's backwards. It's like, wait a minute.
Yes.
Why? Wait a minute. You went into poverty and into loss and even into death. And that's the God we're supposed to worship? Like, how is that?
Right.
It's upside down.
Which, as we reiterate constantly on this show, if you have a faithful preacher who points to Christ and delivers the gifts of salvation to you day after day, week after week, shows up with the gifts in hand, not just to have a conversation and a pick-me-up with you, you truly have someone sent by the Spirit of God to you. Right. Because as I noted in the sermon last week, the Word of God is rare in these days. Again.
Well, this is the diagnostic too, right? He's not going to be of the Spirit if he's preaching, what every other God gives.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even what your heart desires. I think that's true too. Yeah. Because you don't you don't need the God of Scriptures to believe that, there's some God that's, whatever God it is, name you want to give it, is out there either trying to hurt you and harm you or trying to give you gifts, or maybe they're at war with each other and you're, however, whatever kind of pantheon you want to set up.
But all false gods offer the same thing, which is fertility, meaning production and abundance.
Right.
And so we can even read the story of Jacob and Laban that way. That really what that story is about is, hey, you do your best and God will do the rest. You deal with this criminal who's a lying, cheating, underhanded, double-dealing, dirty, down-low scoundrel just because you want to marry his daughter. But look what God says, right? It's transactional. Look at how hard Jacob worked and look what God did for him.
Right.
Versus
14 years, right?
Yeah. Versus, actually, that's not what this is about at all.
Right. Well, a godly wife is a gift.
Right.
That you don't earn and you don't deserve.
Or 2 or 4.
as the case may be.
As
right?
the case may be with Jacob, yeah. But the point is that it's very easy to read Scripture that way. Read Moses. God came to kill Moses in the middle of the night, and of course his wife cuts off the foreskin and rubs it on his genitalia to cover up his sin, and God spares him his life. Transactional analysis. You better do what God says, otherwise death's on the table. That's the old pagan religion. That is fertility, meaning you need to do something, and then the gods will reward you with abundance.
Yeah.
So
instead
why
of circumcision being a sign of the gift, the promise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So why would God let Uncle Charlie die this way? How could God do this to my uncle? That's not the right question.
Mm-mm.
Is he baptized? Is he with Christ in the baptism to eternal life? That's the question.
Right.
But we don't start with baptism. We start with why did this happen to him?
Well, right, because our lives are about as permanent as the bread.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, the bread molds and it hardens.
It's worm eaten, and yeah. Same thing with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is no more ceaseless or tormenting care for man, as long as he remains free, than to find someone to bow down to as soon as possible. But man seeks to bow down before that which is indisputable. So indisputable that all men at once would agree to the universal worship of it, such as science. For the care of these pitiful creatures is not just to find something before which I or some other man can bow down, but to find something that everyone else will also believe in and bow down to. For it must needs be all together. And this need for communality, of worship, is the chief torment of each man individually and of mankind as a whole from the beginning of the ages. In the case of universal worship, they have destroyed each other with the sword. They have made gods and called upon each other. Abandon your gods and come and worship ours. Otherwise, death to you and your gods, which we see in the history of Israel. The parochial God. We see Naaman asking, hey, can I take some dirt home with me so your God can travel with me? And yet, what does Israel say when they're in captivity? Our God has abandoned us. Our God is no longer with us. We're all alone out here.
It's true. They see, how was I going to say this? I mean, they see their earthly warfare as actually warfare between their gods.
Yes.
So they don't have that. Yeah, they don't have that bifurcation that we talked about before between life and faith. Mm-hmm. Whether they actively see the angel of the Lord, leading the armies before them. I think Correct. They did.
Yes.
But at the same time, they recognize that there's a greater warfare happening here. Right. That this is about, well, ultimately, I would say it's about God keeping His promise to preserve them and to give them, the Messiah.
So I'll say something controversial.
Okay.
To upset everybody. That's why the Crusades happened.
Yep.
And that's why Christian proselytizing happened along with, not at the end of a sword, because as I noted with the other day on my podcast, when the Christians showed up and started preaching their God to the Germanic peoples, to the Celts, for example, it's such an inversion of everything they believed culturally, because their cultural ethos was defined by their theology. Mm-hmm. So you're not asking people to change the way that they eat, like change your diet, change the kind of house that you live in. No, everything we do, from the way we build our houses to the way that we hunt and fish to the way that we wage war,
the way we structure our day and our year.
It's our gods at stake here. Yeah. And you're asking me, and that would be the same as asking me as a Christian to give up my God. Hey, stop believing in Jesus and come over here and worship Vishnu with us.
Or give up Christmas and Easter or something.
Whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do it. And we're going to fight. Because biblically speaking, I hate to break this to you folks, but our God destroys pagan festivals and celebrations, such as the Temple of Mithras being full in late December, or the fertility festivals that take place early in the spring around, the resurrection of Jesus. Why do we do that? Because our God refuses to share with other gods.
Although I would say
he sends out his Joshuas and his Gideons and his Davids to wage war against false gods.
Although I echo the psalmist in particular, right? How long, O Lord? I mean, it does seem like sometimes he's taking his time in
Of
doing
course
what
he
he's
does.
promised to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, why do we have to go through this? I mean,
Because they
and
will
of course,
die by their own sword.
yeah. So whether that's exile in Egypt or the wandering in the Sinai Peninsula or the exile in Babylon, I mean, it's like these are actually pretty long, especially
Right.
Egypt. I mean, it started out okay, you know.
Yeah.
What's his name? The son. That was
Joseph?
Joseph. That's I knew it was a J name. Yeah, Joseph. I mean, they're pretty well, and actually they end up being pretty wealthy in Goshen.
Right.
And, you know, things
Right.
are going pretty well, and they go sideways. You know,
Yeah.
new king, and things go sideways.
Exactly.
You know,
I think it
and
was
so you look at
approximately 250 years from the preaching of Jonah to the destruction of Nineveh.
same idea,
Same idea. Yeah.
right? So, but we look at it and like, well, when is he going to bring judgment? It's like, you know, the lightning strikes. You know, the whatever that thing is in London, was it, or was it the Vatican?
Was it? I don't know. I can't remember.
I don't know if it was a fake story or not. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
You know, whether it was lightning that struck the Guidestone or a bomb, whatever. We want God to bring judgment upon even just the icons of
Right.
power.
But
even-
we want it spiritualized. We don't want it to be real.
Well, and I think there's a reason for this. I thought about this for my preaching this weekend, is that it's much easier to point out, you know, judgment against others, but what we don't recognize is kind of the what do you want to say, the way that it whiplashes, or
Jeremiah is going to be carried away into slavery too.
right? It comes back on us because the sins that we accuse others of are ones that we know ourselves,
Sure,
you know,
of
that
course.
reside in our own hearts, and yes, we want judgment for them, but we're hesitant because we don't want that same judgment to come upon us for the
Correct.
same thing.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
It's always the problem.
yeah, that the gods that they believe in are the ones we believe in too. The false
Well, going
gods.
back again to the old pagan model, your worth is determined by the gifts given to you publicly by your chieftain, your brethren chief, right? And so what do we expect from our gods? We want a public display that shows everybody else, hey man, look, God rewarded my loyalty with this, and this shows my worth. Think of it this way.
What's the Megadeth lyric? Meet the new God, same as the old God. Yeah.
No, that's the Who. But Meet the
Oh,
New
is that
Boss,
the
same
Who?
as the old boss. Yeah.
No,
it's
they
from
both
the
quote
Minutes.
it. They both
do
quote
they?
it. Yeah, it's different.
But think about it in this terms, right? This is how paganism found its way into Christianity. You ready? I'm going to anger even some more people. Show me a person's charity, and I'll show you their faith.
Well, that's James's assertion.
It is. It's also the late medieval Roman Catholic Church's assertion.
Mm-hmm.
It's also modern Protestantism and modern Roman Catholicism's primary assertion is that show me your works of charity, show me your works of love, and I'll show you a person that has true faith.
Mm-hmm.
That's paganism 101 and a misreading of James.
I think so.
Well, it has to be. Otherwise, justification by faith alone is a lie.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of people that denied, you know, the canonicity of James. So,
Plenty.
and I think,
And,
I mean,
and even more who deny justification by faith alone.
well, there's that problem too.
Because again, the human heart is what it is, and it says, wait a minute. So God's going to justify me for free, and I didn't earn it or deserve it? Yeah, that's grace.
But
I
arguably,
reject that.
if that's the same James that's in Acts 15, it's like, you know, Paul and Peter both are like, oh yeah, justification by faith. We're not going to worry about circumcision anymore. And James is like, yeah, but just make sure you tell them, don't eat,
Right.
you know, animals strangled and you know, animals with the blood in it still. And you're
Let's
like,
agree to disagree.
James, did you just miss what Peter said? You know,
Right.
it's like we're not going to prohibit any of those things because we've
Right.
been set free. And James is like, well, yeah, except, you know, everybody has Moses' law and it's pretty good.
Right. It's too bad we didn't get any hints of that in the Gospels so that we could be ready for it in the book of Acts.
You know,
That the disciples may somehow, even with the Holy Spirit, say, but wait a minute, Jesus. Not
Moses
them.
is still helpful. He's still
Not
useful.
those over there. I mean, not those people.
Right. Yeah.
So you knew. You could not but know this essential mystery of human nature. But you rejected the only absolute banner, which was offered to you to make all men bow down to you indisputably, the banner of earthly bread. And you rejected it in the name of freedom and heavenly bread? Now, see what you did next. And all again in the name of freedom. I tell you that man has no more tormenting care than to find someone to whom he can hand over as quickly as possible that gift of freedom with which the miserable creature is born. That's the bondage of the will in a nutshell, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You're born in freedom, and that freedom is then used to
Make you miserable.
make you a slave. I think every seminary class should be forced to read this at the beginning of every semester year. Just so they have something to revolt and rebel against going into the parish. Because I think you and I both, in my own life, I would have rejected this in the past. But I read it now and I think to myself, yeah, I don't really actually know many clergy who would agree with any of this. Because they reject freedom.
Right. Well, and we've talked about this, I mean, from experience, there's no, well, I don't know. For us vocationally, there's no greater captivity than being bound to our congregations for our physical well-being.
Yeah.
A material well-being, I should say, and especially that of our families. And we both made efforts to be able to be free preachers that aren't bound to that kind of, food. But I mean, Jesus does this with the 12. He sends the 12 out. What is that in Luke 10, I think? He sends them out and he says, don't take anything with you, and proclaim peace. But if they won't receive you in peace, then you have to move on, because, that by receiving, he means like they give you a place to sleep and they feed you,
right.
and they listen to what you have to say ultimately. Yeah. And that's just it seems like such a hostile relationship to a congregation,
Yeah.
But actually it's the opposite of hostile. The hostile one is where you're held captive to them, and it's just natural that we're always concerned about, like, how is this going to be received?
Right.
Are they going to be able to handle this? If I say this, am I going to get too much blowback? And then I'm going to be worried about, the next shoe to drop.
Yeah.
And it's just no way to go through life.
This is the sermon that's going to get me fired. This one's the one. It's too free. It's too forgiving. It's too far.
It's almost as if you acknowledge that, then people are ready for it, and they're like, okay, he knows that he's going to say something that maybe offend me.
Yeah.
And and you just kind of prep them for that and say,
well, this Sunday's on forgiveness of sin. That's the one your lectionary reading is on forgiveness. And
right.
Yeah. I use a lot of illustrations from the Old Testament. I sent it to you, riffing off of our friend Stephen Paulson's article.
I haven't got a chance to look at it yet. I will.
But yeah, again, like I said, I had a family leave church because I preached a sermon on forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
They left. After coming here for a year, they left because I refuse. I refuse to forgive. Why? Because the person in question doesn't deserve it, and this person has hurt me, hurt us. How dare you say, not only must I forgive because I'm commanded to forgive, but that even in forgiveness, I don't have to seek to reconcile with them. I can simply forgive them and move on. How dare you?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't technically, because I was quoting God's word, but
well, Jesus does this. He forgives the people killing him.
Yeah, right? How dare he? Doesn't he know?
It's like, well, he's going to let him off the hook.
It's not just.
They should be under judgment. That's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it will go back on their conscience. There's no doubt. Yeah.
So there is nothing more indisputable than bread. But if at the same time someone else takes over his conscience, then he will even throw down your bread and follow him who has seduced his conscience. In this you were right. For the mystery of man's being is not only in living, but in what one lives for. Without a firm idea of what he lives for, man will not consent to live, and will sooner destroy himself than remain on earth, even if there is bread all around him, which we've watched happen the last 2.5 years, most pointedly. And that is so. But what came of it? Instead of taking over men's freedom, you increased it still more for them. Did you forget that peace and even death are dearer to man than free choice and the knowledge of good and evil? There's nothing more seductive for man than the freedom of his conscience. But there's nothing more tormenting either. And so, instead of a firm foundation for appeasing human conscience once and for all, you chose everything that was unusual, enigmatic, and indefinite. You chose everything that was beyond men's strength, and thereby acted as if you did not love them at all. And who did this? He who came to give his life for them? Instead of taking over men's freedom, you increased it, and forever burdened the kingdom of the human soul with its torments. You desired the free love of man, that he should follow you freely, seduced and captivated by you. Instead of the firm ancient law, well, there it is. Instead of the firm ancient law, man had henceforth to decide for himself with a free heart what is good and what is evil, having only your image before him as a guide. But did it not occur to you that he would eventually reject and dispute even your image and your truth if he was opposed by so terrible a burden as freedom of choice? They will finally cry out that the truth is not in you, for it was impossible to leave them in greater confusion and torment than you did, abandoning them to so many cares and insoluble problems. Thus you yourself laid the foundation for the destruction of your own kingdom, and do not blame anyone else for it. Yet, is this what was offered you? There are three powers, only three powers on earth capable of conquering and holding captive forever the conscience of these feeble rebels for their own happiness. These powers are miracle, mystery, and authority. You rejected the first, miracle, the second and the third, mystery and authority, and you gave yourself as an example of that. When the dread and wise spirit set you on a pinnacle of the temple and said to you, if you would know whether or not you are the Son of God, cast yourself down. For it is written of him that the angels will bear him up, and he will not fall or be hurt. And then you will know whether you are the Son of God, and will prove what faith you have in your Father. But you heard and rejected the offer, and did not yield, and did not throw yourself down. Oh, of course, in this you acted proudly and magnificently, like God. But mankind, that weak, rebellious tribe, are they gods? You knew then that if you made just one step, just one movement toward throwing yourself down, you would immediately have tempted the Lord and would have lost all faith in him and been dashed against the earth you came to save. And the intelligent spirit who was tempting you would rejoice. But I repeat, are there many like you? And indeed, could you possibly have assumed, even for a moment, that mankind too would be strong enough for such a temptation? Is that how human nature was created? To reject the miracle? And in those terrible moments of life, the moments of the most terrible, essential, and tormenting questions of the soul, to remain only with the free decision of the heart? Oh, you knew that your deed would be preserved in books, would reach the depths of the ages and the utmost limits of the earth, and you hoped that, following you, man too would remain with God, having no need of miracles. But you did not know that as soon as man rejects miracles, he will at once reject God as well. For man seeks not so much God as miracles. There it is. There it is.
This is really something. Because
I don't want God. I want miracles.
Because the thing with the Inquisitor here is that what he's saying is true. I think we said that last week too. I mean, it's not like he's lying, but the lie, I mean, he is lying because the lie is that what man wants should be what directs what God does.
Right. Well, this is Ivan's whole argument. All I want is for him to show me a sign.
To give me what I want. And then what were the three things up here? We had
mystery, miracles, and authority.
Right. And what's, 1880, and I'm just struck by this. It's like Dostoevsky knows what's coming.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't know the second war, or the first two wars.
No, not the wars, but he knows what science is going to do. He has the same perspective as Nietzsche. And again, they corresponded with each other.
So they have a different name. But, like authority becomes power. I was just thinking under Marx, Well, Marx is around. He's floating around at this point. Yeah. Right. So, so it's basically, take care of my body, take care of my faith, and then and then be powerful. Right. I mean, it's these three things. What was I going to think about this? I mean, this is the goal of the totalitarian state is to take the place of what what God alone can give.
Keep me fed, keep me safe, and just tell me what to do.
Right. And so the Inquisitor's argument is that would be a good thing, actually, to have, to basically become what the totalitarian state has become in various ways and contexts, throughout the history of the last 100 years or so. Right. And even more so. And people want this today. They still want it. They want the miracle, I would call it a miracle, of universal basic income.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
like, they don't, it's hard to even articulate it from anything but a spiritual perspective of like, what a terrible burden that this would be to you.
Right.
And,
Well,
and
it's a
some,
rejection of the curse, the original curse. By the sweat of your brow will you bring forth the food from the earth.
right. So rejection of God's word then, but I think there are those who have lived through and it transcended maybe out of the welfare state, especially in minority communities, right, where they talk about the value of hard work, and they would even say it this way, that it has a spirit. I mean, I haven't come from that perspective, but that it has a spiritual benefit. Thomas Sowell has done this, right?
Yeah.
In his books on economy, it's like
Right.
you actually dehumanize people when they no longer need. When you're enslaving them, when you just say, here, we're just going to provide for your basic needs.
Right.
Because now you're burdened to the people who provide for your basic human needs.
Yes.
And you still aren't answering the question, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right. And as we know now, it's artificially created through money printing.
Right.
So
you go from slavery to chattel slavery in the form of Jim Crow to then consolidation of groups within certain centers, population centers, and then you create a dependency on the state. So in that sense, there are whole communities in this country that have actually never been free.
Right.
In their
even
history.
if they don't recognize that. Yeah.
Even if they don't recognize it. But again, going back to Soul, that's Soul's whole point. He has this famous interview where he talks about the lies that we've been taught about slavery. And he drills down into it. And I watch people react to that now who have never heard of him or have never even studied the history of it. They just accept uncritically what they're told and have their mind just blown.
Yeah, like in the first, before the revolution, the majority of slaves, 70% or something, were white, Europeans that had been trafficked over.
And then after the Emancipation Proclamation, that number went right back up to that 70 or 80% once again.
But I mean, the deceit is pretty straightforward here. Is you just change the name of the thing.
Exactly.
You call it universal basic income, right?
Right.
You don't say it. No, this is slave wages.
Right.
Like, oh, well, yeah, we couldn't dare call it that.
Right. It's not it may not be the first premise of propaganda, but it's up there, which is this: language determines reality. So if we change the language, we will change people's reality.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
that's why I was talking about that, like materialization of things, right?
Right.
Or actualization of things.
Right.
Yeah, you can actually, it's part of that procreative image that God has given us, is that we can create things. Unfortunately, both ill and good.
Right. Right. The flu is the flu. So call it the flu.
It's a broad category, yes.
Don't accept the propaganda, because now there's an even broader category that's replaced the flu and pneumonia and bronchitis and other respiratory diseases.
So what would you call it? The long flu? Can we call it that?
Yeah, we call it the long flu.
I'm sick all the time. Maybe we could ask you why you're still sick.
Right,
You
exactly.
Maintain
But
sickness.
as long as we change the language and we change your reality, you'll never ask or question your slavery. Right? As long as you're never allowed to question the number of vaccines that we inject into you, creating lifelong drug addicts who are dependent upon us for their health and well-being.
Yeah.
We're fine. We're good.
I like how, I'm locked into a particular technology ecosystem that has a monthly subscription.
Correct.
And I'm like, and they even use that language, locked in, right?
Yeah.
You're locked in. You're like,
That's why they make it so difficult to find the cancel button.
So if I stop paying, then I lose all my data that you're storing? Yes.
Right.
Huh.
Yep.
So unless I copy it off before I stop paying, what if I can't pay?
Right.
Yeah, then we take it. Then it's
Right.
gone. Like,
So this happened yesterday. Sony announced that, for example, PlayStation users. So you buy, this is the problem, right? This is you and I know this because of Kindle, and
Right.
we know this because
Oh,
of
yeah.
our iPads.
yeah.
So Sony announced that they'll be taking down movies off of their service. And if you bought the movie and it's stored digitally on your PlayStation, it's going to disappear. And of course, the customers are up in arms, but I own that. And Sony says, you need to read the contract. You don't own...
You paid for the rights to watch it.
Exactly. You own none of the digital content. So now that everyone's freaking out, which, again, a couple of years ago, I transitioned back to hard copies of all of my games and movies. Because I'm like, even with books, like with our kids, we encourage our kids to buy the book.
This is why this is really evident in I think on like a Walking Dead, this has happened repeated. They end up in like at a gas station where they still have DVDs, and and they're stuck there in the gas station because there's zombies out there. But then they can watch these shows.
Exactly.
But if there weren't a physical hard copy, none of these
Correct.
things would have persisted into the future.
Correct. Or Twinkies, if you're familiar with Zombieland.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. Is that it very simply and appealingly offers you a gift, which comes with a heavy obligation on the back end, which is, listen, you don't want these DVDs all over the place. And what if you buy the DVD and then you end up not liking the movie?
Streaming music is the same way. Yeah,
It's exactly.
You don't want a physical copy.
Right.
And then, but it's a fundamental denial of the First Amendment then.
Correct.
Or at least not a denial. I mean,
It's just a
you're not
workaround.
entitled. You're not entitled to own these things anyway.
Right.
But I've thought about this because the propaganda now is that that we're all going to have we should all have this dignity to have like a good income and be able to retire and then and have a home to live in. But they never tell you that you're actually going to own those things.
Right. Or define what dignity actually is so that you can discover you have none.
Right. It's one of those virtues, ephemeral virtues.
Dignity literally means self-worth or self-value.
Right. Which should be connected to work and to possession.
So you actually have no dignity because we own you. Like we have determined the value of literally everything in your life, which is the opposite of actually having dignity.
Oh, so we get to define what dignity means.
Correct. Your worth is what we tell you it is. And your worth is determined. Do you have a blue check mark next to your name? Do you have over 1,000? Do you have a silver plaque on your wall that says that you're popular on YouTube? You're somebody? Because if you don't, you're nobody.
Did you know that the NSA has collected more image data in the last year than all of China?
I knew that, but I'm sure most of our listeners didn't know that.
Yeah, so we talk about the surveillance state in Chinese Communist Party and what they do there in China. And it's like the NSA actually does more.
Right. Well, that's how we do it. We distract. Hey, look over there.
Yeah.
I deal with this all the time with other clergy.
Many of theirs, they actually have prohibitions against using like facial recognition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here we use it all the time.
They have prohibitions about what kind of product, what chemicals you can put in your food.
Right.
We don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Go on YouTube and look up comparison of American food versus European food or American food versus Asian food.
Well, we had that with the formula crisis, right? Is that the baby
crisis.
formula coming out of Europe is like, and I talked about the formula that they tried to feed my daughter, and I reluctantly had to let them do it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's going to take a while to recover from all that toxin.
Yes, it is.
Jeez.
We always accuse others. It's called projection. They always accuse others of what they themselves are doing. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever a Democrat or a Republican points their finger and says the people across the aisle are doing X, Y, and Z, they're 100% doing it. And they're just saying, don't look at us, look at them.
Yeah.
Which I think the previous 4 years from 2016 to 20 proved emphatically now.
Right.
Is the
I mean,
case.
we could go back certainly to Patriot Act
Or as
since
Kaylee points
9/11.
out, yeah. And if we don't, we'll just make it up. Because, again, language defines reality. So we will invent
I think she's
reality.
talking about makeup having all sorts of crazy stuff in it.
Oh, yeah, well, makeup, that's, yeah.
Remember all the controversy over like strangling cats to get some chemical for perfume?
Right. Because that's the worst thing they do to animals. Watch the PETA videos. Remember the PETA videos that they put out in the late 90s, early 2000s?
They weren't wrong. That's the thing.
No, they're horrific. You're like, that's horrific. And also, yeah, they're doing what to the eyeballs of rabbits? What? Or,
What was the thing with Fauci and beagles? Yeah.
Yeah, well, the beagles with Fauci and the baby parts. Also.
Oh, that's where, yeah. Well, the beagles are the distraction from the baby parts.
It's like I said in the last episode, though, that we get super upset when animals are tortured. But then when they post online, this is actually how they take a baby apart in order to pull it out of the womb and then they stitch it back together. We're like, well, how are you going to get it out of there? It's like, really? Fauci torturing beagles, that puts you over the edge. But the fact that we dismember a human being and then put it back together to sell it for parts.
Or the dogs that got left behind in Afghanistan, right?
Oh, yeah, let's not talk about those. Don't even get me started on that one. That's...
I mean, I'm sympathetic, but at the same time, it's like, what about all the people?
Right, yeah.
A couple dozen dogs that they at least let them out of the cage. Some of them, right?
So there was an Afghani that was going to take all the dogs, and the State Department said you're not allowed to. You have to set them free.
Oh, is that
so
how it
not
works?
only was he killed, but all the dogs were killed too. Yeah,
That's absurd.
it's evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
absurdly evil.
And P.S., in case you don't know, we're still sending money to the Taliban. The U.S. government is still sending our tax dollars to the Taliban.
Through the State Department, yeah.
Through the State Department.
We got a big cutout in the
And
Ukraine
they said,
money.
we don't do internal audits of where that money goes once it gets there. And you can't have any information. They said
Nor
that.
not the Ukrainian money either.
No, the Afghan money. The
Right,
State
neither of
Department
them.
actually said, the Department of Defense said, you cannot have any information about this. We're not going to give it to you.
Mm-mm.
So tell me again how we live in a democratic republic or a constitutional republic.
I mean, you can't audit the way
No.
that the money they stole from you is being used.
Right. And so to segue back into this, what we see from both sides politically then, because politics becomes religion, show us a sign, give us a miracle.
I know. I check in on Telegram a couple times a day looking for one.
Yep. Just I'm
Like a
still
bad
waiting.
habit. It's like a bad habit. It's
Yeah.
like when
It's just more doom and gloom. It's just, hey, if you thought that was bad, look at this.
we sent 15% of our petroleum reserves to China and India.
Right.
Like what?
So here's a radical assertion. Trump's not coming to save you. So
I don't
you
know
can
if
just
I would
forget
want him
about
to
that.
anyway.
And whoever replaces Biden, he or she isn't coming to save you either, because none of them care about you. None of them care. You're a chattel. That's
Well,
all
it's not.
you
And it's
are.
not just that. Even if they did,
Yeah.
they couldn't. That's correct. That's what we learned from Trump. I mean,
Yeah.
even if his heart was in the right place, the battle that was set before him was
Right.
not one that he could win.
Should we refer to the Gorilla Channel? Should we talk about that?
I think the Gorilla Channel is awesome. They said they're gonna actually recreate it on Truth Social
That's fantastic.
as a troll. You know,
Oh, but it's just phenomenal to be like, who's got his finger on the red button? He's watching gorilla videos. Wait, what channel is that?
he wants
We
more
made one
aggressive.
up.
He wants more aggressive gorilla videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
None of those lame ones.
Yeah. But Biden's the problem with his dementia, or the body double for Biden.
Well, it doesn't even matter whether it's true or not.
It
Any
doesn't.
of it.
Exactly. It's all absurd.
Yeah.
But again, paganism 101. We'd rather worship that and put our hope in that than in Jesus, who offers us freedom.
He has a cool plane though.
Yeah. So here we go. Since man cannot bear to be left without miracles, he will go and create new miracles for himself, which is exactly what we just described.
Mhm.
His own miracles this time, and will bow down to the miracles of quacks or women's magic, though he be rebellious, heretical, and godless 100 times over.
So if you don't do miracles, they're just going to come up with their own.
Right, we got the quacks, that's the doctors and the scientists. Women's magic, I like that one. And rebellious, heretical, godless people 100 times over. You did not come down from the cross when they shouted to you, mocking and reviling you. Come down from the cross and we will believe that it's you. You did not come down because, again, you did not want to enslave man by a miracle and thirsted for faith that is free, not miraculous.
True.
Going back to what I said earlier then, if you have to show that you have faith, to prove that you have faith, you have no faith. Because that would make it not free, but an obligation.
Well, I think we fall into this even, in our attempts to be faithful, which is a kind of an ironic statement, I suppose. But to say, well, look, we have the preaching of God's word and we have the sacraments. And so that's proof that we're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Is it?
Nope.
Yeah.
It shows that we're trying to figure out a hack. Well, I mean, the rest of my congregation can go to hell in a handbasket, but Lord, look at me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it. We talked about this with liturgy before.
Yeah. Turn that into a good work as well.
Right. It's a miracle that we have the liturgy. It's a miracle that we have the sacrament every week. It's a miracle. No, it's actually according to God's word. So shut up, do your job, and go home.
Yeah, but don't you get the goosebumps when it's done really good?
Nope. Not anymore. Nope, I'm dead inside.
Yeah.
You thirsted for love. Excuse me. You thirsted for love that is free and not for the servile raptures of a slave before a power that has left him permanently terrified. But here too you overestimated mankind, for of course they are slaves, though they were created rebels. Behold and judge. Now that 15 centuries have passed, take a look at them. Whom have you raised up to yourself? I swear, man is created weaker and baser than you thought him. How can he ever accomplish the same things as you? Respecting him so much, you behaved as if you had ceased to be compassionate, because you demanded too much of him. And who did this? He who loved him more than himself, Respecting him less, you would have demanded less of him, and that would be closer to love, for his burden would be lighter. He is weak and mean. What matter that he now rebels everywhere against our power and takes pride in this rebellion? The pride of a child and a schoolboy. They are little children who rebel in class and drive out the teacher. But there will also come an end to the children's delight, and it will cost him dearly. They will tear down the temples and drench the earth with blood. But finally the foolish children will understand that although they are rebels, they are feeble rebels who cannot endure their own rebellion. Well, that's what we're discovering right now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pouring out their foolish tears, they will finally acknowledge that he who created them rebels no doubt intended to laugh at them. They will say it in despair, and what they say will be blasphemy that will make them even more unhappy. For human nature cannot bear blasphemy, and in the end, always takes revenge for it. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so turmoil, confusion, and unhappiness. These are the present lot of mankind. Turmoil, confusion. You want miracles? You want what else? Mystery? And you want authority. But miracles, mystery, and authority will lead to turmoil, confusion, and unhappiness.
Or actually, he's the Inquisitor saying the lack of mystery, miracle, and authority.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens.
Correct.
Right, and this is why we just came off patriotic holiday. I mean, those are the things that they want from the state.
Correct.
Or we would say government, civil government.
Concord and unity, law and order.
Right. Right. Peace on earth, then, ultimately, right? No turmoil, no confusion, no unhappiness. Everybody provided for, everyone living together. I'm bringing about unity. But, what's the old saying? Unity through strength.
That's right.
Right. It's like,
Through
you mean terror.
Firepower.
Yeah, superior firepower.
Right. Well, it's like Nine Inch Nails saying, happiness and slavery.
That's true. Or happiness is a warm gun.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
John found out that's not true.
Oh, too soon.
Too soon. He was a communist. Leave him alone.
Well, but that's my point.
He did get out of bed during his protest so the maid could make it for him. So
that's my point, is that, I think Dostoevsky, I mean, he's seeing these things. It's in the philosophical cultural waters.
Yep.
Right. But I think the other thing that he's noticing is that it's a conflict of faith.
Yeah.
Right. And we've talked about I think I mentioned Engels, titling the manifesto, the communist religion or the communist faith.
Yeah.
And that it's the post-enlightenment, that move towards, the modern, state that has kind of this comprehensive character and isn't limited, is actually, it runs contrary to the church. I also wonder if there's something else going on with Dostoevsky, because he, in this inquisiting, but with the man, is that it's not something we haven't talked about on the show, actually, is the Eastern doctrine of Theosis.
Yeah.
Because he keeps saying that about, like, you expect them to become like you.
Yeah.
And yet you offer them nothing, that they want or that they perceive they need.
Right.
And I don't know if Dostoevsky is being critical of it. I think he is. Is saying, like, we cannot become like Jesus.
No, which, if you read his other works, that is blatantly clear, especially in The Idiot, for example.
Okay.
Like in The Idiot, is like, if the idiot is Jesus, then not only do we not want to become like Jesus, we will actually mock, ridicule, and he will be a scandal to us.
Right, but isn't that how we usually, even in the Western Church, even in our tradition, sometimes have presented what we call sanctification, being made holy, as being made like Jesus.
Yeah, conform to the image of Christ. And we read that as do stuff like Jesus did stuff. Right.
What would Jesus do is the Protestant version of that. With the bracelet, as if somehow it's a magic talisman.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of hilarious. Well, those 4 letters are going to automatically make you, do better things and be more like Jesus. But it's so naive.
Yeah.
Because one, we can't. I mean, it's actually, and from our perspective, it's it's through declaration, right? It's
Yeah.
through forgiveness of sins, which is declared
Right.
to us. God declares us holy and sanctifies us through His Word,
Right.
which, in some incomplete way, it makes itself known in our life. But that's the point.
But again,
It's-
there's that passivity that offends us. It
Yeah.
offends the old Adam. Because when I say pagan or old, I'm saying the old Adam, the sinner. It
Mhm.
offends us that we are passively justified and sanctified. Like Paul says, he whom he foreknew. What did he do to you? He glorified you. He justified you.
Predestined.
He
yeah.
sanctified you. Why? Because he wanted to. What did you do? Nothing. Well, how did he do it? He just said it to you and it was done.
Right. And
Okay,
you
but
didn't
what do I
even want
do?
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you didn't even want it. So we have plenty of time this summer on this whole thing about parables. We can go and read about Prince Mishkin from The Idiot, because there's a great excerpt from the book that I'm thinking of that is profound in the sense of Mishkin attends a dinner party, which is, it's Jesus at a dinner party of the Pharisees, right? But it's set in Russia. And again, it's Dostoevsky taking a scene from the Gospels, Jesus at the dinner party of the religious leaders, and then casting it in bourgeois Russian society. And basically saying, to your point, yeah, everybody says they're a good Christian and everybody follows Jesus' example. But if Jesus actually showed up at their dinner party, they would be like, this guy's an idiot.
Yeah, they don't even
That's the
recognize
title
him.
of the book. He's an idiot. And he means it in the classical sense of an idiot, of like, you stand outside culture. You stand outside. You're an individual. You're an idios. You're so out of step with what everybody else is thinking and doing and believing. You couldn't possibly be connected to this thing that we're doing. And yet, that's his point, is not only is he connected to it, he is the connection that you claim to have.
Yeah.
And your rejection of him shows not only the impiety of your belief, but the impossibility of conforming yourself to his image.
And maybe that's the reason why it's so hard to catch in the Inquisitors. This is a soliloquy, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's what you want to call it.
Sometimes it's even called a poem, actually. It's
Really?
weirdly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that it's so hard to find something to complain about,
Right.
because he speaks to our own heart, our sinful
Yeah.
heart,
100%.
and he speaks to our own expectation. His criticism of Jesus
Right.
here is actually fair.
It's like you said, it's entirely truthful. It's not even like a little lie. He's just pragmatically right. Straight down the line, he's right. But you also have to remember that Dostoevsky at one time was an atheist.
Yeah.
So
So he gets it.
he gets it exactly.
He knows
This
the best
isn't-
arguments.
He
yeah.
didn't come up with this in the bathtub one afternoon and said, I have to write this. This is him as a Christian saying, when I was an atheist, this was my argument.
Well, and that's why I mentioned, I think in the last episode, this reminds me of God in the Dock, Lewis,
Right.
and Lewis has that same kind of, coming from unbelief. It's like, no, he went through every argument
Right.
until finally he had
Yeah.
nothing left. Yeah. So he puts God into the judgment seat and puts him through the paces. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's just so much going on. But turmoil, confusion, and unhappiness, these are the present lot of mankind. After you suffered so much for the freedom. Your
Two
great
kinds of
prophet.
freedom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your great prophet. Yours. Tells in a vision and an allegory that he saw all those who took part in the first resurrection, and that they were 12,000 from each tribe. But even if there were so many, they too were not like men, as it were, but gods. They endured your cross. They endured scores of years of hungry and naked wilderness, eating locusts and roots. And of course, you can point with pride to these children of freedom, of free love, of free and magnificent sacrifice in your name. That's very interesting. I never really thought about that until this moment. They endured your cross, that is suffering for the faith, because the world's going to reject you because they reject Christ. Scores of years of hunger and nakedness in the wilderness. Eating bugs.
They will eat the bugs and be happy.
And the roots. Yeah, that's very interesting. Because there are, again, in Eastern Europe, for example, there are countries now where they're doing this. They're marketing bug protein and replacing meat with bug protein. And they didn't ask them. They didn't offer it as an option. They just took the meat out of the supermarkets and replaced it with this new product.
Right, but what I was thinking, because he's referencing basically that we live the life of the prophet, like John,
Right. John
right?
the Baptizer, yep.
Right. And so I hadn't really thought about this, but like having no property, having no home,
Yeah.
having very little clothing and having to eat whatever you can find in the wilderness.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, so you're trying to make us like John?
Yeah, you're
Why?
trying to make us onto Essenes.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I think it's that John was under, this obligation, right?
Well, yeah, he was under the obligation, but also notice everyone left the city and the temple to go hear him preach in the wilderness.
The
So
wild
you're-
man. Yeah.
You're creating a problem for yourself by pushing this agenda.
That's what I've often thought. It's like it would now that it's been exposed in a much greater way. I mean, people have known about it and talked about these sorts of movements, these totalitarian state movements, globalism and whatnot.
Right.
For a long time, 100 plus years, right? At least it's certainly been the trend for probably a couple hundred years.
Well, since Dostoevsky. And
yeah,
Nietzsche.
at least.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in our modern state. I mean, there have been other successful attempts previous to that, of course.
Yeah.
But now that they've really revealed, here's the agenda. We don't care that anymore.
Yeah.
It does seem like there's a lot of people that will passively receive that then and just be like, well, okay, I guess I can't stop it. What's coming?
Right. Yep.
But then but I think you can't underestimate the potential of rebellion. Like the Dutch farmers are a good example of this.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, we're just going to come in and claim your property and use it for housing. And you're like, no, you're not. We're farmers and we're going to farm the land.
Right.
It's like, well, we didn't anticipate that.
Right.
It's like that you would use your tractors like weapons. Yeah.
Yeah.
You saw the picture of the armed tractor.
Yeah.
That I don't remember what the name was, but it had like some kind of shielding on it, like it was a tank. It was a tractor. I mean, that's always the problem with large scale machinations. Like there's all sorts of unpredictable elements. I mean, Putin knows this, right? From the invasion. It's like, well, the first incursion, that didn't go as we thought it might. So then he adapted strategy, and now they're in, long haul artillery, just slog it out.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, new strategy. We'll try a new thing. I don't know. I don't get the impression that the people trying to engineer these globalist movements are all that intelligent. Maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe they want me to think they're not intelligent.
The AI is telling them what to do. It's all based on models.
Right, exactly. Computer model.
So how intelligent are they? That they
the model
literally are
only knows
slaves to the AI.
Yeah, they only know what's happened in the past, unless it's quantum, and so then they're seeing predictive analytics.
Well, that's what Aladdin is. I mean, that's what it sounds like, anyways.
Yeah, that's true.
So remember that there were only several thousand of them, and they were gods. What of the rest? Is it the fault of the rest of feeble mankind that they could not endure what the mighty endured? Is it the fault of the weak soul that it is unable to contain such terrible gifts? Can it be that you indeed came only to the chosen ones and for the chosen ones? But if so, there is a mystery here, and we cannot understand it. And if it is a mystery, then we too had the right to preach mystery and to teach them that it is not the free choice of the heart that matters, and not love, but the mystery, which they must blindly obey, even setting aside their own conscience. Excuse me. And so we did. We corrected your deed and based it on miracle, mystery, and authority. And indeed, and mankind rejoiced that they were once more led like sheep, and that at last such a terrible gift, which had brought them so much suffering, had been taken from their hearts. Tell me, were we right in teaching and doing so? Have we not indeed loved mankind, and in so humbly recognizing their impotence, in so lovingly alleviating their burden and allowing their feeble nature even to sin with our permission? Why have you come to interfere with us now? And why are you looking at me so silently and understandingly with your meek eyes? Be angry. I do not want your love, for I do not love you. And what can I hide from you? Do I not know with whom I am speaking? What I have to tell you is all known to you already. I can read it in your eyes. And is it for me to hide our secret from you? Perhaps you precisely want to hear it from my lips. Listen then. We are not with you, but with him. That's our secret. For a long time now, 8 centuries already, we have not been with you, but with him. Exactly 8 centuries ago, we took from him what you so indignantly rejected. That last gift he offered you when he showed you all of the kingdoms of the earth. We took Rome, and the sword of Caesar from him, and proclaimed ourselves sole rulers of the earth, the only rulers, though we have not yet succeeded in bringing our cause to its full conclusion. Oops. I think he's talking about the New World Order.
Well, I was going to say he's talking about the Roman Catholic Church.
He's talking about the Roman Catholic Church, but he's talking about
It's the same thing. No, it's the same thing.
They literally were talking about this stuff back in the 1880s.
Right. Well, and they want the same thing. Miracle, I should say they govern by the same things. Miracle, mystery, and authority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. To this day.
To this day, right? And
Yep.
this has been our challenge, I think, in teaching the sacraments, in particular, baptism, Lord's Supper, is that a sacrament means mystery. We've inherited that from the Roman Church. But then we spend a great deal of time talking about, that the benefit of the sacrament is not just a spiritual benefit.
Correct.
But like baptism, for example, is an identity, and with it a vocation, a daily living out of baptism, forgiving one another,
Right.
Love and mercy for one another, living as children of God, trusting in His Word, listening
Fruits
to
of
His
the
Word,
Spirit.
praying. Yeah, exactly. And so it has, actual. It's not just a mystery. Like, what is it? And it's just like, it's this thing. It's this spiritual thing that we do.
Yeah.
But it's actually very practical with the Lord's own word. He attaches very practical benefits.
Right.
Same thing with the sacrament of the altar, which is even harder, I think, for people, because they think of it usually, at least in my experience, even in our own tradition, as being kind of something we do together.
Right.
Communion, right? We do it together, and we miss that. Like, for most of our history, even as Lutherans, it was the sacrament for the sick, that you would bring it to those who were ill, believing that it provided them with bodily healing.
Correct.
And like, I haven't bumped into anybody in my entire ministry that actually believes that. That they should, like, when they're sick, they call the pastor because they want the sacrament for healing.
Right.
That Christ's body and blood actually, just as it did in the Gospels, it still does now.
Correct.
Like they came up, they even touched the hem of His garment and they were healed.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, no, I don't want his body and blood. What?
Well, I have science to protect me now.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that must be it. A different mystery, actually.
Well, this is the point. And the new God, the God of nothing. So to your point then, and again, this is discernment. We say that through the forgiveness of sin, we receive new life and eternal salvation. What is the inversion of new life? Well, it's Satan's new world order. So it doesn't matter if it's political, ideological, or it doesn't matter, because at root, what it is Satan saying, no, I have a way that I'm going to rule the world.
It just can't be the same thing that God gives.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, as long as it's not what God gives.
Well, exactly. It's an inversion of the new life in Christ.
You can have your best life now.
And you just delineated the new life in Christ, which is forgiveness, love, in the form of charity, kindness, hope, all the fruits of the Spirit. That we live in our baptismal vocations, being crucified and put to death in our selfless service to others. The new world order of Satan, and I'd say that not, again, apart from the NWO conspiracy stuff, the real conspiracy is Satan simply wants to set up a new world without God's word in it, without Christ in it. And so as a consequence, every new world order, every new conspiracy by Satan to invert God's word is going to function on miracle, mystery, and authority.
Right. So it could look like Elysium, or it could look like Mad Max. It doesn't really matter.
Correct. It doesn't matter, so long as it's not Jesus.
Right. Right. Christians, living together.
Go watch the Book of Eli with Denzel Washington.
I haven't seen that.
Perfect example of that, actually.
Okay.
Because, spoiler alert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's no Bibles. There's no word of God in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. And this blind man has memorized the King James Bible, and he's got to get to Alcatraz, where the scribes are at, so that they can transcribe the Bible.
Oh, this sounds like it's right up my alley. I should have seen this one by now.
You haven't seen this movie? Gary
No.
Oldman's the villain who wants the Bible because and this is so perfect. So Gary Oldman, the villain, understands if I have the Bible, I can control people. Because he says that. Like, other books are important. Other books can change people's lives, but only the Bible, because it's they believe this is God. And if I can control the word of God, I can be God. And if I can be God to them, they'll do anything I want.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
And so he wants the book because he's like, Eli's got the book. This wanderer's got the book. And everyone's like, And of course, I don't want to ruin the rest of it for you, but everyone's after this book. And then the reveal at the end, you're just like, oh, of course.
He just knows it.
It's kind of like The Sixth Sense, where at the end you're like, oh yeah, all the signs were there throughout the entire movie that he wasn't alive. You just didn't notice it because you were caught up in the narrative. It's the same thing in the Book of Eli. Plus, he's kind of a samurai, so it makes it even more fun. But no,
who did this? I don't even know.
Who did the Book of Eli? That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
But I own it on Blu-ray because it's awesome. Yeah, Mia Kunis is in it, Jennifer Beals, Ray Stevenson, Tom Waits is in it. It's great.
Wow, what a cast.
Let's find out. 2010, written by Gary White, directed by Joel Silver. Of all people, Joel Silver directed it.
Huh.
Yeah.
I guess it's the question, the writer.
Albert Hughes and Alan Hughes. The Hughes brothers directed it, that's why. So Silver must have produced it. But the Hughes brothers directed it, which is probably how Denzel Washington got attached to it.
There you go. Okay. Add it to my list.
But anyways, Book of Eli. Great post-apocalyptic movie.
My favorite genre.
There we go. Let's see. So where are we going here? Why have you come to interfere with us now then, right? Roman Catholic Church, the sword of Caesar. Why did you reject that last gift? Well, you could have taken the sword of Caesar. You could have taken it. You would have given us universal happiness had you just taken the sword of Caesar. Why did you reject that last gift? Had you accepted the third counsel of the mighty Spirit, you would have furnished all that man seeks on earth. That is, someone to bow down to, someone to take over his conscience, and a means for uniting everyone at last into a common, concordant, incontestable anthill, Tower of Babel. For the need for universal union is the third and last torment of men. Thus the United Nations, thus the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Mankind in its entirety has always yearned to arrange things so that they must be universal. Universal health care, universal basic income. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's the New World Order of Satan. Everything must be universal. Everybody must be the same. Everyone must be equal. Oops. I said the secret part out loud again.
I know. I don't know why you keep bringing that up.
I know, right? Equity politics is satanic.
Why? Because there's only one source of unity?
Yeah.
And it's not that.
Mm-hmm. Notice, I was thinking about this last night, because as I am wont to do. You even notice that all of these movements center around genitalia? Everything is about either consuming something that comes from our genitals or worshiping our genitals. Everything, throughout all of history.
Well, I think it has to do
back to fertility cults.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's attached to, I think it's ultimately just attack on the family is what the goal is. Because the family is the source of life that God has established, right? So if we destroy that,
societies, as Dreyer noted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we can tear that down, then we can remake society however we want with whatever. Well, it's the video I posted on Telegram, right, of the eugenics lady, and she's like, "Oh yeah, no, we'll just have all these fertilized embryos, and we'll screen them, and then we'll implant the best ones." And
I think you have to go one deeper, though. I think
she's like, "It's like in Gattaca, except it's not terrible." Right. And you're like, "What?"
Gattaca's terrible. But go one deeper with what you just said, because it's not cultural. Again, ultimately, the root is theological. It's the original temptation is, if I can tempt the man and woman to sin, then there will be no fruit from her womb to populate the earth, and therefore God's creation will die. And then God comes along and says, I'm going to weaponize the woman's womb against you. And so Satan's whole project then is to render the woman infertile so that the original promise, you will spread over the entire face of the earth and multiply.
Yeah.
So the original promise must be reverse engineered. Well, how do we do that? As you noted, eugenics, social engineering, forced population control, euthanasia. All of these things are, yes, an attempt to undo the family, but at the root of the family is God's promise. You will multiply. You will spread over the face of the earth.
It's interesting because in the scriptures, Old Testament, it's it's specifically attached to the promise of Jesus.
Yeah.
So why attack the offspring? Well, because they're attacking the promise that's been given to come through the offspring of Eve.
Every fertility cultist is an attack on the original promise.
But now after Christ has come and he's resurrected and ascended, I've heard this argument made is now the purpose or the benefit of children. Since it's no longer attached to the coming of Christ, it no longer has that same kind of comprehensive character. And like, well, except it's given at creation.
We sing that, set us free to be children of God.
Right. And then the idea that you wouldn't bear children and raise them up in the nurture and
Correct.
admonition of the Lord, that they be saved. It's like,
Or that you have a choice.
well,
It's a promise, not a command.
it is.
I
Right, but
would
that's
have to
the
check, but
distortion.
I'm assuming it's jussive in Hebrew. It's a jussive
I don't
verb.
remember.
I can't remember, but I'm going to guess. But anyways, because he says you will. He didn't say you must. He says you will.
Well, and I've thought about this with like the climate change and then the whole
Mhm.
ecological, we're overpopulating, the Malthusian myth and all of that.
Mhm.
And it's like, all of that still, you're back to the same problem. It's like, no, you're
Right.
rebelling against God's word, which says he will provide for you your daily bread. You
Mhm.
even pray that each day, and yet you don't actually believe it because you
Right.
don't live like you believe it.
Which, by the way, is why Satan must destroy Christians, because we actually pray that the promise would be fulfilled in the present tense. Give us this day our daily bread, which includes children.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
true. I mean, we've lost that a little bit because we're not as agrarian.
Sure.
But it used to be that, having a large family was eminently helpful, especially if you're a
Mhm.
farmer,
Right.
because they would assist
Mhm.
you and they would inherit it. And,
Well, it's such an interesting thing because, again, I was talking to you last night, which turns out she's not. And, but going through that conversation again
yeah.
with my wife, and like our happiness has increased with every child. And just speaking for ourselves, the thought of having 5 more children is both scary at our age, but also, are you saying that there's literally happiness beyond what we're already experiencing? There's satisfaction and joy
Right.
beyond what we're experiencing right now?
Right.
And the answer is yes. Because, and you know this better than anybody, is to watch your older children interact with your younger children and see this interweaving, almost like this tapestry of children parenting children, of taking care of the family within
Right.
the family, and this kind of clan dynamic. At least I think for both you and I, it's so rewarding to see that.
Yeah, you don't need a home ec class,
Right.
as part of their schooling, because they grow up in a home where
Yes.
they learn to change the diaper, they learn to make the bed, to take out the garbage, to
Right. Well, they
make
learn how
lunch.
important it is to take responsibility for your part, because, again, it's like a tribe. It's like a village. If you don't do your part, then the entire thing falls apart.
Right, but it's exactly what Paul says to, I think, Timothy, right, about the older men,
You're right.
encouraging the younger, and when you have you're 22 and you've got a 14-month old
Yeah.
sibling,
Sure.
and maybe you end up having your own children that are the similar age to your
Right.
to your own
Mm-hmm.
siblings. I mean, that
Mhm.
you think, oh, that seems weird. Why does that seem weird to us? I can't get
Well,
my head
like you
around
said,
like
though, we're no longer a part of a culture that puts any emphasis or relevance on that,
right.
because the state's responsible for raising our children.
Right, but I think what's lost is wisdom.
Of course.
Not just pure knowledge, but wisdom.
Mhm.
And how to live, together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because by the time you get to college or beyond college, you've been forced to interface with all kinds of other people who are taking bread off your plate, literally at the table.
Yeah, that's true.
So then when you encounter other people out in the world, you're like, this is not a crisis. Like, let me tell you a crisis. Crisis is I can't go to the bathroom during dinner because my plate will be empty when I get back. That's a crisis. Like,
no,
a
I can't go to
crisis is
bathroom
knowing,
at dinner because
Yeah.
all the bathrooms are full.
exactly, knowing that there's only so much ice cream in that carton.
Yeah.
And if I get distracted or diverted, I'm getting the bottom. I'm getting the dregs of the ice cream, right?
It's so true.
But on the
So
flip
true.
side, then too, for those who can't have children or don't have children,
Yeah.
it's not as if you're quote unquote barren and cursed, because again, this is an Old Testament question constantly of
Sure,
like, oh, God's
sure.
cursed this person. Now we're back to works. Who sinned, this woman or her parents, that she can't bear children? It's a curse. Rather, no, God's going to take that barren womb, so to speak, that person that does not have 12 kids or whatever, and simply say, no, now you're going to have, these are your children now. I'm going to give you to this family. And not
Sure.
even children. Like, I'm going to give you a new family. And so your children, within the context of this family dynamic that I'm putting you in under the 4th commandment, is going to include other people in authority. It's going to include other moms and dads, other grandparents. Like with my Mexican family, I'm not the father of children. I'm the son of a Mexican doctor and his wife. And when I'm with them, hopefully God willing in October again, and we're walking around in Rosarito, it's obvious I'm not Mexican. Like, I'm 6'2", 185, and I'm super white. And I'm a head taller than both my parents. But again, within that culture, if he says I'm his son, That's how I'm treated. I am an Angulo, no questions asked. Because it's not about your skin and it's not about your biology. It's about this is the family. And now he's a part of it. And so he's going to take care of us too. It's not just up to my biological children to take care of me. It's up to this son and these other sons and daughters that we have, that they're going to take care of us as well. Because like my mom said, they kind of run an orphanage, but for adult children.
Right. So I think, what the Inquisitor is getting after then is he's driving that responsibility that's it's just almost biological. It's inherent in these relationships that we're put into.
Right.
And then offloading that into this institution.
Right. Exactly.
That can't really do it. But I mean, he's suggesting that they can do it better. The Inquisitor is saying, yeah, we can actually do this better because we can unify all people.
Right.
Which is one of the talk about
church, small C church in this case. We have an infrastructure. We have old folks' homes. We have sanatoriums. We have hospitals. We have children's homes. We have reformatory schools. We have it all. We don't need you and your freedom when we've got an institution built around charity.
Right.
This was Luther's shock when he arrives at Rome for the first time, expecting this city with bejeweled streets and saints walking amongst normal people. And he gets there and it's a cesspool. And he's like, this is the evilest city I've ever been to in my life. Like,
well, they had institutionalized things like whorehouses and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. He's trying to pray his way up the stairs and he's being walked over by other monks. They're like, hurry up and pray faster. He's like, what? He's like, I got to get up there to pay my money so I can go home. It's a long walk back to the monastery. Hurry up.
True
You're
story.
praying too slow. Yeah.
True story. Yeah.
So mankind in its entirety has always yearned to arrange things so that they must be universal. There have been many great nations with great histories, but the higher these nations stood, the unhappier they were, for they were more strongly aware than others of the need for a universal union of mankind. Great conquerors, Tamerlanes and Genghis Khans, swept over the earth like a whirlwind, yearning to conquer the cosmos, but they too expressed, albeit unconsciously, the same great need of mankind for universal and general union. We talked about this when we read Dreyer about how the Eastern Church worked hand in glove with the communists to preserve the institution.
Yeah.
And so when these conquerors come, these Grand Inquisitors, what do? They don't suffer martyrdom. They go, hey, we can help. If you promise to spare us, just like the religious leaders do to the Romans in Jesus' day, if you spare us, if you grant us certain privileges, we will make sure that there will be no rebellion, no civil war, no treason or insurrection. We will keep the peace.
Peace on earth. I mean, we have a common cause.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We can promise peace on earth and goodwill towards all men. If you give us the sword, we'll give you their heart.
I suggested this to my congregation the other day, and that we, to borrow a term, we were psyoped as a church.
Yeah.
When the church had a greater role in our civil society, to say, okay, here what we're going to do for you, because you're such a great benefit to us, and we have, again, common cause, of healthy families, healthy communities, and whatnot. We're gonna give you some tax credits, right? So your preachers and your teachers, if you're willing to reclassify them as ministers,
there we go.
They can have this housing allowance,
Yeah.
and your no property tax as long as it's used for the purpose of ministry. But like we were saying before with Godfather, an hour or more ago. But we're going to expect something from you too, which is ultimately now that we're just going to replace you.
Yes.
As far as being the authoritative voice in society. We're actually going to make demands, right?
Well, we're going to make you so irrelevant that people are going to pity you and come and worship us.
Right. Because we made it easy for you. We made you soft.
Remember the famous thing about Bill Clinton is, I feel your pain. Like when Bill was in the room with you, it was like you were the most important person. You were the only person in the world. And it was like he could feel what you were feeling.
Common trait of all charismatic leaders.
Right. And you're like, he's a psychopath. And everyone's like, no, he's great. Like, he's so understanding. He sympathizes. He understands because of the way he grew up in a brothel, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not how this is going to shake out in the end. And it turns out we were right. But the point is, I feel your pain. And everyone's like, he feels our pain. It's like, ugh, again? You're going to fall for this again? Hearts and minds, baby. Hearts and minds.
Yeah, exactly.
And the church just went along with it.
Yeah.
Had you accepted the world in Caesar's purple, which we can get into liturgical colors, but you would have founded a universal kingdom and granted universal peace. For who shall possess mankind if not those who possess their conscience and give them their bread? Which, by the way, get the American flag off your altar. Get it off. You're not, again, we're Christians, we're not statists. Stop it. Get it off. It's blasphemy.
Yeah.
It's gross.
Christian nationalism.
Again,
right?
you want to talk, I just thought of, again, your whole point about how we got psyoped. We got psyoped into putting that thing on the altar to prove that the Germans, at least, weren't Nazi sympathizers during the Second World War.
Okay, fair enough.
And again, reflect back a year. Hey, where's the Ukrainian flag?
Mm-hmm. It was in
that's
front of some churches, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Look how that worked out.
I didn't post that meme because I thought it might offend too many people. No, I don't. I think I just forgot to post it. But it's the same thing. It's like church and school and whatnot, except it has the Roman the Legion.
Posted it. Yep.
I did post that.
banner.
Okay. Yeah. I mean that seems absurd to us today, and it's like, well, then you're not taking today very seriously.
Correct.
You're not being that critical.
Yep.
Yeah. I think this makes sense, though. I think
Yeah.
it makes sense, in that, from a very practical standpoint, the Inquisitors, he's saying something that resonates here. It's like, okay, the church isn't responsible for the civil estate.
Yes.
He's saying, the Inquisitor's saying that.
Yeah.
But he's saying that if we would just work together, then we could have both peace on earth and peace in heaven, right?
Yeah. It'd be great.
Yeah. It'd be great.
Goodwill towards all men.
Mm.
And so we took Caesar's sword, and in taking it, of course, we rejected you and followed him. There it is. Oh, there will be centuries more of the lawlessness of free reason, of their science and their anthropophagy?
Yeah, whatever that means.
Anthropophagy. That's interesting.
It's not the word you thought it was.
No. Anyways,
The eating of human flesh by human beings.
Yeah, well, phagus to eat or to put down.
Yeah,
the
right.
throat,
Phagus. Yeah.
For having begun to build their Tower of Babel without us, they will end in anthropophagy.
They'll eat each other. They eat their own.
Wow.
That's great.
And it is then that the beast will come crawling to us and lick our feet and spatter them with tears of blood from its eyes, the beast. And we shall sit upon the beast and raise the cup, and on it will be written mystery. But then and only then will the kingdom of peace and happiness come for mankind. You are proud of your chosen ones, but you have only your chosen ones, while we will pacify all. And there is still more. How many among those chosen ones, the strong ones, who might have become chosen ones, have finally grown tired of waiting for you, and have brought, and will yet bring the powers of their spirit and the ardor of their hearts to another field, and will end by raising their free banner against you. But you raise that banner yourself. With us, everyone will be happy, and they will no longer rebel or destroy each other, as in your freedom, everywhere. Oh, we shall convince them that they will only become free when they resign their freedom to us and submit to us. Will we be right, do you think, or will we be lying? They themselves will be convinced that we are right, for they will remember to what horrors of slavery and confusion your freedom led them. Freedom, free reason, and science will lead them into such a maze and confront them with such miracles and insoluble mysteries that some of them, unruly and ferocious, will exterminate themselves. Others, unruly but feeble, will exterminate each other. And the remaining third, feeble and wretched, will crawl to our feet and cry to us, yes, you were right. You alone possess his mystery, and we are coming back to you. Save us from ourselves. Receiving bread from us, they will see clearly. And of course, that we take from them the bread they have procured with their own hands in order to distribute it among them without any miracle.
Of course.
They will see that we have not turned stones into bread, but indeed more than over the bread itself, they will rejoice over taking it from our hands. The bread they worked for. They will rejoice when we give it back to them.
Redistribution of wealth, yes.
For they will remember only too well that before, without us, the very bread they procured for themselves turned to stones in their hands. And when they came back to us, the very stones in their hands turned to bread. Too well, far too well, will they appreciate what it means to submit once and for all And until men understand this, they will be unhappy. Who contributed most of all to this lack of understanding? Tell me. Who broke up the flock and scattered it upon paths unknown? But the flock will gather together and again submit, and this time, once and for all. Then we shall give them quiet, humble happiness, the happiness of feeble creatures, such as they were created. We shall finally convince them not to be proud, for you raised them up and thereby taught them pride. We shall prove to them that they are feeble, that they are only pitiful children. There it is. But that a child's happiness is sweeter than any other. They will become timid, well, there's that, and look to us and cling to us in fear like chicks to a hen. They will marvel and stand in awe of us and be proud that we are so powerful and so intelligent as to have been able to subdue such a tempestuous flock of thousands of millions. They will tremble limply before our wrath. Their minds will grow timid. Their eyes will become as tearful as children's or women's. But just as readily at a gesture from us, they will pass over to gaiety and laughter, to bright joy and happy children's song. Yes, we will make them work, but in the hours free from labor, we will arrange their lives like a children's game, with children's songs, choruses, and innocent dancing. Who is the primary focus? Who's the primary demographic of today's pop music? I talked about this in the last show too.
Yeah, children.
11 and 12-year-olds.
I was also thinking of that that interview with Harari, the kind of transhuman poster child for World Economic Forum now. Although, Homo sapiens was his first book, right? Which I thought was actually kind of interesting. I haven't seen the new one, the Homo Deus one, but that we will become like gods. That's their thing. Mm-hmm. But they asked him. They said, "Well, what are you going to do with all these people who are weak and feeble?" He's like, "We'll give them drugs and video games."
Exactly.
He's like quoting the Inquisitor as it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, because they'd be pretty much worthless,
right.
But we'll give them a basic income and drugs and video games, and that'll keep their mind occupied, and they won't rebel.
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
Yeah.
And people obviously got shared a lot because it's clearly demonic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yet he just presented it as like, oh, well, what else are you going to do with these people who are kind of worthless?
He's very the key to Satanism is it's extremely pragmatic.
Although, did I post the guy who was in the South African Satan church, how he quit? Oh, I should have posted that. Yeah, he quit because apparently he read the Bible.
I hate when that happens.
I know. And he quit and he renounced his membership because he says he's a Christian now. It was kind of an interesting video. He's obviously, and he's a very disturbed looking person too, because he's got all the, anytime you do stuff with your face, it's just weird, right?
Sure.
I know piercings and whatnot are probably okay, but yeah. I should have posted it. Maybe if I find it again, I'll send it.
Let's wrap it up with this last sentence because it just keeps going, by the way, for another couple pages. Oh,
right.
Let's just wrap it up this. He goes, so after the children's games and songs and choruses and innocent dancing, we will allow them to sin too. They are weak and powerless, and they will love us like children for allowing them to sin. We will tell them that every sin will be redeemed if it is committed with our permission, and that we allow them to sin because we love them. And as for the punishment for these sins, very well, we take it upon ourselves. And we will take it upon ourselves, and they will adore us as benefactors who have borne their sins before God. And they will have no secrets from us. We will allow or forbid them to live with their wives and mistresses, to have or not to have children, all depending on their obedience. And they will submit to us gladly and joyfully. The most tormenting secrets of their conscience, all they will bring to us, and we will decide all things. And they will joyfully believe our decision, because it will deliver them from their great care and their present terrible torments of personal and free decision, and everyone will be happy. All the millions of creatures, except for the 100,000 of those who govern them. For only we who keep the mystery, only we shall be unhappy.
So this is the sacrifice that we need to make, that we're making for you and for your freedom. Look at us, great benefactors, great benevolent people.
It's literally like they read this and said, well, there's a template for our platform today.
No, but I was thinking, well, Huxley has the same kind of language coming from the elites, and certainly Orwell does too. That it's just it's common, right? I mean, you get this from
Satan,
right? But think about like Rome, not the Roman Church, but the empire, right? What did they call themselves? It was the Patris Fraternity. They were the fatherland, right? It was basically fatherland.
Exactly.
They referred to themselves as fathers. Benevolent fathers who care for their people, right? And maybe some of the Caesars were better than others.
Yeah.
Well, probably. Some of them were pretty terrible. Hopefully there were a few better ones, or it wouldn't have persisted, likely. But it's that character, right? We're going to make these sacrifices as your loving fathers, so that you can live, happy, content lives as children.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's condescending. That's the word.
Of course it is.
It's like, no. Right. And that's why I think we're so critical now of the majority of our government being unelected and being appointed.
Chosen for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Chosen for us, even if they were, ostensibly elected, still chosen, more or less. Yeah. That they're putting themselves in this position.
Right.
And it's just the lie of it, right? That it's completely, well, they're public servants, right? That's the language we use. Well, there's probably some that believe that, and that serve, what we would say faithfully, or at least diligently for our benefit. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine that every one of them are evil. I mean, I know people who serve. I have members of my congregation that work for the USDA, for example. Yeah. It's like, is the USDA entirely corrupt? No, I don't think so.
But it's a monster.
It is a monster of an institution.
That's what I'm saying. It's a monster. It's like, I know people that work at the State Department. I know people that are or were contractors for the CIA.
Right.
I know people in other 3-letter agencies who tell me the same thing. They're like, no. After I got out and got a little bit of clarity and objectivity, I was like, oh, I was just a drone. I was like a gnat.
A cog in a machine. Yeah.
On the back of a water buffalo. And so I was doing my mission. I was doing what I was contracted or sent to do. I did it to the best of my abilities. I did good. Like, I saved good people's lives, especially working with like NGOs, for example. You're like, I helped dig wells. I fought rebels so these wells could be dug so that these people didn't die from dysentery or E. coli.
Right.
But then I found out that they were using us to traffic in weapons and money and all this other stuff. And that
all
the
under
rebels
the guise of being benevolent. Yeah.
Well, the rebels I shot were being bankrolled by the same company that was paying my check every month.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, what did you do? And you're like, well, I'm talking to you about it, and I quit. That's what happened because I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. It's a monster, and the monster must be fed. I mean, the church as an institution is a beast. We talked about this with Capon.
Right. And that's the direct criticism that Dostoevsky's making, is not so much of the institutional, state church.
Right.
Just state
church
as
itself.
Church, but the church itself, yeah.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable because
you always outgrow your mission. Is that the kind of idea?
Well, it's the when Satan infiltrates any institution, it becomes monstrous by its very nature. Then, because that Satan is the beast.
Well, in my experience, though, it's not just large churches. I mean, I think maybe it's easier. Maybe it's easier, but it seems like, any church institute. It could be just a single congregation that's not even part of a synod or something like that. Yeah.
If you get more than 2 or 3 people in a room together, it can quickly become an institution. Quickly.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's very easy. Very easy. And the only thing that separates a cult from the Church of Christ is literally Christ and his word and his gifts.
Right. Well, how do you know the institution takes over? The Inquisitor just told us, right?
He just told us how it takes over.
There's all sorts of permissions that are given for the sake of harmony and unity. Yeah.
Right.
We're going to look the other way on this one because XYZ reason.
It's the lesser of 2 evils. It'll be that kind of language.
Yeah. Right.
Or, well, you just don't understand the situation. It's a situational ethic argument.
Pastor, you're being way too dogmatic here.
Yes, you're being too. This is not. You're blowing this completely out of proportion, Pastor. It's not that bad.
It's not black and white.
Right. Yes. I love that one. Yeah. It's not as black and white as you want it to be, Pastor. Well, you hear that from your own congregation. You hear that within your own family. You hear that from your institution too.
I always remember, this was the interrogation of Jesus on divorce, right? He's like, well, Moses didn't see it as black and white, but it actually is.
Well, here,
Sorry.
let me float this one at the end of the podcast for you to, as a question for you directly. Voltaire famously said that if you want to know who has power and rules over you, find out who you cannot criticize.
Mm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is when the institution has been taken captive by Satan.
Right.
The church as institution. So if you're not allowed to criticize the institution, the church as an institution, that means then that it has power over you. And I wonder then if that isn't the conversation that needs to then happen is, if we are the Church of Jesus Christ and we are here to forgive and be forgiven, to pile grace upon grace, if I criticize you and your response is, you're not allowed to do that, or I'll remove you from your pulpit, I'll remove you from the ministry, I'll put you on some blacklist, I'll do whatever, I'll get you canceled.
Right.
Isn't that indicative then of
Yeah.
the old Adam basically making that deal with the devil?
I think so. I mean, we have that pattern of, how to be critical, set forward in the formula, right? Where
Formula of
it's
Concord and the Lutheran
Formula of
Confessions.
Concord, which are the last of the confessions, Lutheran confessions, and it's very explicit. If somebody says, here's something that's kind of indifferent, right?
Yeah.
We have a technical word for that. Doesn't matter. If it's indifferent, but they tell you have to do it,
Right.
then you must.
Neither
you must-
commanded nor forbidden by God.
Right. But then you must not do
Right.
it. If they say you have to, or if they say you can't, then you must. I mean, it's kind of like, it makes particularly Lutherans seem a little bit obstinate because we're
Right.
always, but it's that kind of self-referential criticism is what it's meant to be.
Read on the Heavenly Prophets.
Hmm.
Because he says that in like the first 3 paragraphs, I think, where he they accuse us of teaching this, which we don't. And they accuse us of not teaching that, which we do. So instead we teach both and reject both equally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, when I teach that, I use the example of, the always famous, candlelit, Christmas Eve with Silent Night.
Sure.
It's like, if we had a Christmas Eve without that, would it still be Christmas Eve for you? And that's the diagnostic. And it's like, well, if I get rid of that, it's no longer Christmas
Right.
Eve. Not
Well-
the hearing of Luke 2 and the preaching of the
Right.
gospel
Well, I
or
mean,
something.
You have to take Wotan into consideration too. I mean,
Okay. Yeah. But I think this applies to anything institutional.
of course it does. Yeah.
Like in my case, we have a church with a school, right? We've
Mm,
always
yeah.
operated a school, right?
Right.
Continuous. There have been times where it's been sketchy, but,
Right.
but the question still remains, right?
Yeah.
If this congregation had no school, would it still be a congregation of the Lord, right?
Right.
Would we still exist? Would we still have purpose? Right?
Mhm.
And that shows you where your idols are, I think.
Right.
It shows you where you put your fear, love, and trust. It
Right.
isn't God, and when it becomes anything institutional. I've had this with like organ. If the organ's not playing, we've talked about
Sure.
that before.
Mhm.
But I had this conversation yesterday. Somebody, mentioned that, oh, well, so-and-so is not here, but a lot of people aren't here that I remember being here a long time ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The congregation has changed. And for some people, the identity of the congregation needs to be this fixed entity,
Right.
whereas it's changing all the time,
Right. It really is.
and
You just
whether
don't
it's this,
see it unless you're away for a while and come back.
yeah, that's true. Whether the Spirit's weeding them in and out, through,
Sure, absolutely.
they rebel against
Right.
God's word, or they just move or whatever. I mean,
Right.
natural attrition, that kind of thing.
But
yeah.
at root, you just pointed out the key thing there, which is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
We never want to wait for the Holy Spirit. We always want to jump to and go, hey, it's this reason. Versus, pastor over here, dumb, confused pastor. Let's just wait on the Holy Spirit.
Well, and I think the other great deceit here is that, the goal of that we be, glad and joyful
All
and
things
happy.
to all people so that we can be glad and joyful.
No. The idea that the congregation of God is going to be a place of joy, happiness, and
okay.
comfort,
Right.
but again, it's very material. It's not. It's
Right.
It's not.
Well, that's what I mean, though, is that the church trying to appeal to everybody, trying
I
to
see.
be all things for everybody in church on Sunday, so that they are those things that you said, happy, joyful, comforted, ends up producing exactly what he critiques, which is you're actually going to produce disunity because everyone's going to be upset. It's like I said,
because you reject the true source
Right.
of unity. Yeah. Okay.
So I say, I want everybody to write down on a slip of paper one sentence that they'd like to hear in the sermon, and then I'll put all those sentences together and make a sermon out of it.
Right.
And everyone's like, that would be terrible. I'm like, why? Well, because it wouldn't make any sense. I'm like, exactly. And yet each of you comes to me individually during the week and asks me to say something in the sermon that completely contradicts what the person before and after you said. It's just that you think you're the only person saying those things to me.
Same thing with hymnody, what we sing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I was
Right.
thinking, what's being demanded and what's being suggested here by the Inquisitor is a utopian, commune.
Right. Yeah.
And we have no example of successful
Which, by the way,
utopian
was also
communes.
becoming very popular in Dostoevsky's day.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that, and I visited many of these. Oh, I thought of the other one that I forgot the other day that I visited.
that?
Well, anyway, I was talking to Dan Van Voris, for Christian Christian History Almanac, and for some reason our family visited utopian communities consistently for family vacation without knowing that's what we were doing. So we went to the Amana colonies. We went to
how did you not know what you were doing?
Pennsylvania Dutch. We ended up with Nauvoo, Illinois, the Mormons there. And
Really?
now the other one I forgot about, it's near Santa Claus, Indiana, which is a funny name for a town. But it's actually called, it's some kind of utopian name. What is it called in southern Indiana? It's where Helmut Thielicke, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's buried there by the
Okay.
lake. Yeah, because he summered there.
Oh.
I don't know. Why would you do your summers in southern Indiana? I don't know.
He's German. Don't try. I
Yes, I
understand.
can't figure it out. But yeah, he's buried there. But it was this utopian community. Guess what? It wasn't successful. Now it's a tourist spot,
There you go.
which is more successful than being a utopian community, apparently. Yeah. So you look at these. None of these were successful. There's others. There was one on the north side of Chicago. It's long gone now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Always
why I
offer the
wonder.
same thing.
So now we're trying to do it on a global scale, and we think we're going to be more successful.
Right. Exactly.
It seems like maybe even God strikes these things down and,
Yes.
and prevents their course
Right.
from being followed. I don't
Correct.
know.
So preach Christ.
Yeah. Let him form whatever community he does imperfectly.
Administer the
in
gifts
this
of
life.
salvation. Receive the gifts of salvation. That's the mysteries. The stewards of the mysteries of Christ. The mysteries are actually public. This is the point, is that everything that is Christ is public. It's free and it's
I mean,
public.
not secret doctrines? Oh,
Not
okay.
secret, not a mystery, cult. It's open. And it's very simple. Words, water, bread, and wine. So simple. So simple, as I point out, even a literate monkey could do my job. To which I say that because the elders are constantly freaked out when I'm not here because they don't know what to do. And I'm like, so are you saying that you're less competent than a literate monkey? And they're like, why do you have to keep bringing that up?
Yeah. As long as you can read the book, you can do it.
Yeah, you're fine. You're good, guys. Call in back up. It's okay. It's good. But and I'm grateful I have elders that I can tease like that and can tease me back. But that's the point, is that my relationship with my elders is based on the gospel and the gifts, not on the strength
Yeah.
or the deficiencies of my personality, because I have so many, and they're quite aware of that. They may even call me a drama queen from time to time. But and I'm like,
Fair enough.
Exactly, fair enough. Can't argue. But the point is, then we're free men in the gospel. And free men in the gospel are also free then to confess and be forgiven, absolved. And that freedom, as you noted earlier, is messy. It's so messy. But the counter to it, well, we'll just lock everything down and make up more rules and just be more obedient to the law. It actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
It makes it so much worse because you're killing the gospel. And that ultimately then is the drive of Satan. It's the drive of the Grand Inquisitor, the drive of the church that he speaks for. What are you trying to do? We're trying to keep Christ up in heaven where he belongs so we can run the show according to our will.
That's right. Remake creation in our own image.
And as he said at the end then, and we'll pick it up here on next time when we come back, we'll bear the suffering of the world, we'll be the ones who are sad and unhappy so that we can maintain control.
Look at all the sacrifices we'll make for your
Exactly.
well-being. Yeah.
And so, by the way, that's, of course, a keystone of manipulation, is to listen for someone and say, don't you know how much I've done for you, how much I've done for this family, how much I've done for this church, how much I've done for this business? That's a key statement of a manipulator.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you know?
Because it's not a gift. It's a sacrifice
Exactly.
that demands returns.
Exactly. Whereas Jesus' sacrifice demands nothing in return other than simply you receive the gift, which
Pure gift.
technically
There you
isn't
go.
your choice either, which drives us nuts. So
Thank you, Holy Spirit. All right.
thank you, Holy Spirit. So thank you to everybody for listening. We might have to break this up into an episode or two.
I don't know. We'll probably leave this one whole, but we're going to end up with at least a 3-parter here.
Yeah, we will, because there's at least another episode at the end of this. And then we'll move on to, I don't know, Young Goodman Brown or some other parable, because we have plenty of summer left, like I said. But as always, thank you for all that you do to support us and this podcast. Thanks for everything you do to support 1517 and our mission. God willing, and the creek don't rise and air traffic controllers don't go on strike. We'll see you in October in San Diego. And otherwise, yeah, we're just grateful that you're out there listening, and we thank you for all your encouragement and for following the podcast. again, to the family that came to our church this past week who got turned on to Lutheran theology because of this podcast, thank you. And I'm grateful that you could, get turned on to Lutheran theology from us.
Yeah, beautiful thing.
So we'll talk to you soon. Peace.
All right, fading out.
There we go.
Push stop. All right, good, done.
Yeah, that had a kind of internal momentum today.
It did and it didn't. I mean,
Like I couldn't stop. Like there was just like every sentence you're like, no, more. Give me more. Say more.
well,
And I've read this dozens of times, but it's like you get to certain sections, you're like, keep feeding me. I want more of this.
no, I think it's contextual, is that we're
Yeah.
hearing those echoes of
That too.
the leaders in the
Right.
in
Yes.
the Davos are
Yes.
speaking to us. It's like, oh, the Inquisitor is the Davos guy,
Right.
which shows you. I mean, it's interesting. This explains why the Jesuits are involved. In the Vatican.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's all of one cloth. It's the
Yeah.
same idea. It's just done by different. They're different
Right,
institutions.
bagmen. Mhm.
Yeah, and they're collaborating for the same ends,
Yes.
and that it's all antichrist.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, oh, but also that deceitful guise of this is, we're doing this out for in your best interest.
Go watch the Comedy Hour. Tim Brewer. Somebody had to say it. I posted it in Telegram.
That's pretty funny.
It's phenomenal, especially at the end when he starts.
He's got that almost Jim Carrey kind of vibe to him,
Yep.
with the
Yep.
facial expressions
Yep.
and the body language.
And he does again. He owns it. He leans into it. It's like when he's talking.
Some
about his
people
mom.
won't find him funny. That's why I made the comment I did about the clip.
Yeah.
Is that because he's so, outrageous?
Well, as he said in a previous special, he's like, I look like I'm always on drugs.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
He
That's
looks
what I
like a
mean.
stoner, and he looks like he's making stoner. And he talks about heavy metal and going to Slayer, Metallica concerts, and he does that too. But again, he uses that to mask. Like somebody had to say it, where he just comes out of the gate. He's just like, let's talk about it. Let's address COVID. Let's address the lockdowns. And
Well,
then,
many comedians have talked about that. That's what was missing during the lockdown, is that
Yeah.
we didn't have the comedy that
correct.
would usually, it was like the court jester would
Yeah.
be the one that would keep the king like.
Right. And there's
from
lots
getting-
of comedians I can't listen to anymore because they flip.
Well, their job is actually to get you out of your lane
Yeah.
and to point out your absurdities and
Mhm.
the stupid things you say.
Right.
And then when the like late night hosts come on
Right.
and they just repeat the talking points
Right.
of the regime,
Right.
you're like, you're not serving your purpose anymore, and I
Right.
don't need to watch you.
Well, it's
Because
like I
your
said
job was
you,
to be critical of
Yeah.
everything.
like Bill Burr attacking people for doing their own research during COVID, or people
Yeah.
criticizing Fauci and the NIH, and it's like, and then just shredding Kyle Rittenhouse as a Nazi and a coward. And you're like, what happened to you?
You don't have to support him either. I mean, that's
Right.
the whole point.
But at least be
just-
funny.
And be equal opportunity critic,
Well, there's that. Yeah, exactly.
right? I mean, that's the jester, is like he's
Yeah.
nobody's friend,
Right. Exactly. That's a great comedian.
right? Because then, it's Ecclesiastes again. It's everything
Yeah,
is
right.
vanity. But you almost need that perspective, otherwise you take things too
Right.
seriously.
Well, if you have the stomach for it, and of course he's persona non grata nowadays, but go watch Louis C.K. on abortion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I saw him do that live, and I was in a stadium when he did that, and he, for like 15 minutes that he did it at that time, he lost 50% of the crowd, literally every sentence. It was like watching a tennis match, because he would say something and half the crowd would be like, yeah, and then he'd flip it and go, but it's murder, and then the other half of the crowd would be like, yeah, and he would just go back and forth, and he never actually gave you what he actually thought was the answer. He just kept going further and further into the absurdity of both arguments. Because he starts off by like, listen, if you believe this, then you can't believe that. It's just
Right.
that simple. So stop yelling at each other, because you're not going to convince the other side that you're right. But that being said, now let's dive into the absurdity of both sides and how they decided to argue. And his point is like, listen, if you believe that God creates life, there is no argument about when abortion happens, or when life begins and when the abortion is abortion. But if you deny that there's a God and that life doesn't begin because God created it, then there's no reason that you shouldn't abort babies, because they're
Right.
nothing but
Infanticide. Yeah.
Exactly.
Even,
He's like,
yeah.
but on the other hand, and then he goes into it, and again, he'll offend everybody with that monologue. But I appreciate the fact that he's like, listen, you're both equally wrong in your approach to the argument. So let's just call it out, and just own your belief. Own it. If you're a godless atheist and you believe it's a cluster of cells and it's not murder, go crazy. But if you're going to do that, why are you against the death penalty?
Mm.
That
Yeah, I
kind
can
of
see
thing.
how you'd start to lose people.
But
Yeah.
then he says, but if you believe that God creates life, how can you be for the death penalty? And then he goes into those arguments. And he does it he grew up Roman Catholic. So he's got a very firm foundation
Right.
in catechesis to make the argument in such a way that he doesn't just give an opinion or this is what's in the news. It has a very deep theological and philosophical.
It's not going to be a lazy intellectualism.
It's
yeah.
not. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, ultimately why people are offended by him, because it's not going for the joke.
Right.
It's like the because but maybe, which is one of my favorite things he ever did. He's like, if we all just closed our eyes for a year, there would be no more nut allergies. Meaning, if we just closed our eyes and let kids eat nuts, there would be no more nut allergies because they'd all be dead. But of course, that's terrible. Of course. But maybe, again, of course, it's terrible when you serve the military and you go to a foreign country and you get shot and killed. Of course, it's terrible. But maybe if you're shooting at them and they shoot back and kill you, it's kind of your fault.
Right. Well, and that's why I posted that eugenic video, is that
Yeah.
we repel at the word, but if you fail to listen to the arguments,
Yeah.
then you don't actually hear like how my point is that we
Right.
actually believe a fair amount of the eugenics propaganda ourselves.
Right. Well, it's like when I was an atheist back in the 80s and 90s as a child and in college, I always thought it was absurd that pro-life Christians were blowing up abortion clinics and assassinating abortion doctors in their cars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're against the murder of babies, but you just shot this dude as he was coming out of his clinic to stop abortion.
Well, it's a categorical distinction. Yes.
Right. You're like, well, what? Again, even as an 18-year-old, I was like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, because it's warfare. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, exactly. It's warfare. And they're going to hell anyway, so it doesn't even technically count as a murder. And you heard people go, it's a crusade. And you're like, okay, but it doesn't make any sense to me. The
Yeah.
90s. Everything was so much easier. With Rodney King.
You're being sarcastic. Okay, good.
So sarcastic. But I was watching something last night from the early 90s, and they were talking about the Rodney King verdict and making a joke about all of it. I was like, oh, times were simpler back then. Minus the burning down of the city and all that.
Yeah, it's basically the same as now, just but
we
just
didn't
it
have
was
as much
simpler.
coverage. It
It was
was simpler.
simpler. It was
Yeah.
simpler. It was the same stupid arguments, but there were less
It's
of
like
them.
you posted about Watergate, though, that article about Watergate, which nails it. It was like, yeah, back then it was very binary. He lied. They broke in. This is what, and then after the fact, you're like, this doesn't add up.
Well,
No, it adds up just fine. Shut up.
I appreciate. I mean, he was a lawyer in
Yes.
the defense of Nixon, so
Right.
he had an agenda. But he's dedicated his entire and alongside practicing law, his entire academic life since then has been trying to get to the bottom of this.
Right.
And only now, over the last, what has it been, like the 2017, I think, is
Yeah.
when
I think that's when I first read anything.
Yeah, his first book, because the prosecutor on the case, or whatever, whoever was responsible for the indictment, his family donated all of his notes to a library.
Yeah.
And so then you could read the note, so you could read the opponent's side, and now things are being declassified too. It's 50 years, so you're starting to read these things and so we weren't told the whole story.
Right.
No, we weren't told the whole story.
Right.
No, it was politically motivated. Yes, of course it was politically motivated.
Well, going back to Louis C.K., when in one of his specials, he goes, I watched the President of the United States walk across the lawn of the White House, get on a helicopter, wave, and just disappear. Like, that happened in my lifetime. And you're like, why did Nixon do that? Well, it's because they had him.
Mhm.
Whatever they had on him or whatever they said to him, he just walked away. He literally just walked away from the presidency.
Well, after going mad for a week.
Well, yeah. I mean, he had paranoid issues. We have the tapes. But he was obsessed with the Kennedys for that reason. But he had good reason to when you actually hear the recordings and you read all this information that's been declassified. You're like,
well, that would be an interesting book to see the connections between, the intelligence work on with Kennedy.
Yeah.
And then to Nixon.
It'd be
What
phenomenal.
happened.
Yeah.
Because they're of a sort. I
Yeah.
mean, one was assassinated, the other one was politically assassinated.
Well, but the same players were involved in the game.
Who later become president? Yeah. Okay.
Well, the same player that was in Dallas became the head of the CIA in the mid '70s.
I know.
And was the person who ran point on the Nixon Watergate stuff.
I know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then you had Kissinger. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
This is why I've subscribed. I actually paid for Viva Barnes.
Yeah.
They're because on their it's not Patreon. What do they use? Oh, Locals.
Mm-hmm.
Their Locals subscription. It's $5 a month. It's not a big deal. But Barnes does all sorts of things he can't say on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So originally it was like vaccine related stuff, but then he does a series called Hush Hush where he just says, "What if to Louis C.K.
Nice.
What if Elon Musk is actually a CIA operative or something like that?" And then he'll go through the argument as a lawyer would.
Sure.
He'll present evidence and say, and he's so good at it because this guy knows how to write opening and closing statements and win cases, right?
100%.
So he can take any set of data and make the argument, for a position, even one that he doesn't actually believe in personally.
Right.
And so he does this, and he'll do this. It's like, well, what if, so he did Seth Rich recently,
Mm-hmm.
he actually did a whole series on Clinton deaths, and just presented it, not necessarily, as if this idea, was true.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful because you can see, he believes in conspiracies, because he's a lawyer and he actually, yeah, exactly. And just how easy it is to psyop to just tell a story through narrative with the same set of data and give a very different, conclusion than the one that's being presented to you. And so it's helpful to kind of help think through critical thinking skills and whatnot. And so, yeah, I think, did they have the Nixon guy on there? I don't know if he did. But watch the interview he did with, it was on Powerline podcast. They did a 2-part. And I think he makes a compelling case that at least this needs to be revisited.
Yeah.
And you don't want to you can't relitigate it because everybody's dead or a lot of people are dead. But you do need to relitigate it to see where's the intelligence failures, where's the actual political failures of this, and then did we actually make it better or worse since?
Right.
I think we made it worse.
Well, we can ask their kids since they're all in office. They all got rewarded too. So.
All right, good.
Cool.
I'm going to end the broadcast.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week. Peace.